Okay, so firstly, thank you so much to everybody who obviously have attended. If this is your first session with the Resistors Reading Group, we had a temporary break and we're just reconvening our Malcolm X series. Today's session is entitled The Muslim Malcolm, Understanding His Black and Islamic Identity. What we're going to do first and foremost is just go around the room, and if everybody can kind of introduce themselves a little bit. So in the discussion segment, if anybody wants to address anyone else, it is kind of a lot easier to do so. My name's Nadia, and I'm one of the I'm essentially the chair today. And we have other sisters in the Resistors reading group. Some of the sisters unfortunately weren't able to attend, and one will be running a bit late. But we have Ayan, so is it okay if we start off here and then we go that way?
Yeah, so I'm Ayan, and I work as a science editor, but yeah, interested in decolonial studies.
I'm Kiku, and I'm learning various things, going to various groups and things.
Okay, sure. Can we start with yourself?
Me? My name is Zara. I'm working in HR for law firm, and I'm also interested in this talk.
Thank you.
My name is Bowie. I'm from France, and I am an e-learning assistant, and I like the Pan-Africanism ideology.
My name is Bagou. I'm French too. I'm here since 1 week.
Brilliant.
Sorry for my English.
No worries at all. Thank you for attending. Okay, no worries. Yeah, that's fine. But you can hear me, right? Yeah, that's fine.
James, PhD student here at the English Universities.
Brilliant, thank you. And Falak, essentially, who's come today. And Habib, do you want to introduce yourself? You can introduce, and then I'll just introduce you, essentially. So Habib Akande is a British-born writer and historian of Nigerian descent. Habib graduated from Kingston University with a first-class BA with honours degree in business and film studies. After his graduation, he travelled to Cairo, Egypt, to study Arabic, Islamic law and Islamic history at Al-Azhar High School and University. He is also the author of 5 published books on blackness in Islam, Muslims in Brazil and Afro-Arab sexuality. So essentially today, Brother Habib will be exploring Malcolm's black and Muslim identity after embracing true Islam, or rather Orthodox Islam. Malcolm's dedication to the truth is something which we should all aspire to, a man of moral discipline. Malcolm was a firm defender of black people against white supremacy and was willing to sacrifice his life for his beliefs. His conversion to Islam did not stop him from tirelessly working to destroy the human cancer of racism and lift the self-esteem of black people. Immensely proud of his African heritage as well as his Islamic religion, for Malcolm there was no contradiction in being black and Muslim. So some of the questions in which Brother Habib will explore in this session today, first will be, why did Malcolm's conversion to Islam not prevent him from fighting for the plights of black people? Why is Malcolm's Islamic belief often ignored by Pan-Africanists? Why do many non-black Muslims ignore Malcolm's blackness and Pan-Africanist ideology? And why did Malcolm believe that Islam can erase the human cancer of racism? These questions were actually proposed by Brother Habib himself. He's looking to address these questions, so he decided to focus on these particular issues. Just for the video, is it okay if I just ask you to raise your voice a tiny bit? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, brilliant. And I'll just hand it over to Brother Habib. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Nadia, for inviting me. Is it loud enough?
Is that loud enough?
And most importantly, can you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes I've got a habit of speaking a bit too fast. So if you don't understand anything I'm saying, raise your hand and I'll slow down, breathe, and take a glass of water or something.
No worries, just a little bit louder.
A bit louder, okay, yeah. I mean, as Nadia said, I'll mainly want to talk about Malcolm's black and Islamic identity. But before I go into the talk's quite informal, hopefully about 30 minutes. and I want to explore some of the questions which Nadia mentioned, and also hopefully with the question and answer or the discussion phase after I'll give my talk, I want to get some of your views as well, because these are some questions which I kind of think about as well in terms of trying to understand Malcolm's Black and Islamic identity. Quick overview, I'm sure most people are aware of who Malcolm is. For the purpose of this talk, I'm mainly going to be focusing on the last year of Malcolm's life. When people, I mean, Malcolm X obviously is a public figure that is well renowned and well known, but there's two Malcolms in terms of what we see in the public on like YouTube and things like that. There's the Malcolm X during when he was a minister for the Nation of Islam Black Muslim movement for 12 years, and there's also Malcolm X, also known as Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, after he converted or embraced true Islam or Sunni Islam in 1964 up until he was assassinated in 1965. For the purpose of this talk, I'm going to be focusing on the Muslim Malcolm, meaning Malcolm after his conversion to Islam and how his views changed in terms of his understanding of race relations and even his ideology as well. So I want to talk about that. But in order to understand Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, you need to understand Malcolm X, i.e. the Malcolm X that was in the Nation of Islam, and some of his beliefs or the beliefs of the Nation of Islam. One thing I wanted to do before getting into the questions, I think it's important, and obviously some of you can see from the notes, is to define some terms. I think it's very important to define some terms that I'm going to be using today. And the reason why I'm explaining what these terms mean is because people use terms differently to mean different things. So the first term, by me using the word Islam or Sunni Islam or Orthodox Islam or quote unquote true Islam, I'm referring to the Orthodox religion of Islam, that the monotheistic faith, which is the religion of the Muslims established in the 7th century by the Arabian Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So when I use the word Islam, Sunni Islam, Orthodox Islam or true Islam, or if you see some of these words in some of the speeches that's in the handout, that's what it refers to. Okay. By Muslim, when I use the word Muslim, I'm referring to someone who follows Sunni Orthodox Islam. Okay. When I use the term Black Muslim, I'm using that term referring to those who follow the Nation of Islam Black nationalist sect. And I think, and the reason why I want to explain these different terms is because even when you read Malcolm X's book, or even when you read anything during that period, you hear a lot of times when people referring to the Black Muslim, they're referring to the Black Muslim sect, which is not the same as Sunni Islam. So I think that's important that people understand that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the theology of the Nation of Islam and how it differs from the theology of Sunni or Orthodox Islam, and then how and why that had an impact in terms of Malcolm's worldview in terms of understanding race relations. The next term, Nation of Islam, also known as NOI or the Black Muslim Movement. And one thing also I want to point out, the last 4 chapters of Malcolm X's autobiography from out to 1965, you notice that because he's talking about his transition from when he was kicked out of the Nation of Islam to embracing Sunni Islam, and then making a famous pilgrimage to Mecca, you notice that he refers to the Nation of Islam as the Nation of Islam a lot, right? We know that Malcolm X, the book was finished or completed by Alex Haley. Obviously, he wrote the book with the assistance of Alex Haley. But if you were to listen to a lot of Malcolm X's speeches after he made the pilgrimage to Mecca when he embraced Sunni Islam, he generally refers to the Nation of Islam as the Black Muslim movement, not the Nation of Islam itself. And I mean, my thoughts why there's that difference, because again, you especially during the last 4 chapters, very rarely he refers to the Nation of Islam as a Black Muslim movement. I think that's maybe Alex Haley's used Black Nation of Islam rather than use a Black Muslim movement. One of the reasons why I think Malcolm X did not refer to the Nation of Islam once he left as the Nation of Islam is because he didn't want people to have this idea that the Nation of Islam is from Islam, was part of Islam, because they're very different, and which I'll explain a little bit later in terms of theology and whether they're like true or real Muslims. Okay, so that's just a side note which I think maybe people should be aware of, and that's why in a number of the speeches that I've printed some excerpts from, you'll notice that he's constantly referring to the Nation of Islam as a Black Muslim movement as opposed to the Nation of Islam, what they self-identify, what they call the group itself. And obviously the Nation of Islam is an exclusively Black African-American pseudo-Islamic sect proposing a separate Black nation. It was founded in 1930 by a man called Wallace Fard. And the second leader was Elijah Muhammad from 1934. And also, as we know, it came to prominence under the influence of Malcolm X, and its current leader is Louis Farrakhan. Now, the Nation of Islam's beliefs has changed somewhat since when Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965, but I'm mainly going to be talking about what were their views or their beliefs during his time. Okay? So I'm not going to be talking about, because again, I'm not going to talk about what the Nation of Islam's beliefs now, because some of their beliefs will come more in line with Orthodox Islam, but I'm mainly talking about during the 50s and 60s, whilst Malcolm X was trying to grow the group. By black, I'm referring to a member of a dark-skinned people, especially one of African, Australian, or Aboriginal descent. I think that's important, especially nowadays where the term black can be used politically, referring to people who are non-white. For the purpose of this talk, when I'm referring to black people, I'm referring to people of dark in complexion, primarily of African descent. So I'm not using like political blackness, meaning that it can refer to anyone who's non-white. Racism, I'm sure you understand what racism is. And again, another thing I want to point out is by racism, I'm referring to racism as in the belief that one race or ethnicity is superior to another, not institutional racism or structural racism. And I think that's important that people understand how I'm using this term, because you might hear people nowadays that say a black person can't be a racist or Muslim can't be a racist under the, not that they're incorrect, by that definition they're referring to racism meaning like structural racism or institutional racism. And obviously in a white supremacist country, black people are the minority and Muslims who are also the minority, they can't be institutionally racist. So but I'm not using that definition, I'm using the definition of racism. When you hear racism, I'm referring, or when you hear me maybe say that Malcolm X was a racist or the Nation of Islam group was racist, I'm referring to the belief that one race or ethnicity is superior to another. And that can happen, and that's for black people, white people, whatever. It's not just specifically for white people, okay? And obviously you've got the definition of colorism, which I'm sure people know what that is. And then obviously white supremacy, the belief that white people, the white race, is superior to all other races, especially the black race, and therefore they should dominate them. Black nationalism, by black nationalism I'm referring to the advocacy of the national civil rights of black people. Again, by black people I'm referring to those of African descent, and I think it's important that people understand that I'm not referring to political blackness. And just on a side note, this is something, I think yesterday when I was compiling these notes, I think Jay-Z's song was playing, and I remembered, don't ask me why, but this is, I think, why this is important, and why I wanted to define these clear terms. The track was Heaven, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, and he was referring, the song is with Justin Timberlake. Some people look at me, why am I talking about Jay-Z? In the song, in the first verse, he said, arm, leg, arm, head, and something like that's God's body, right? Mm-hmm. Now, has anyone heard of the 5%ers Nation? No?
Yeah, I just read about it.
Sorry?
Just read about it.
You just read about it. Okay, so the 5% Nation is a prominent group in African American communities today. They were established in 1963. Their leader was a gentleman called Clarence 13X, who was a former member of the Nation of Islam, and he was also a former student of Malcolm X. After he left the Nation of Islam in 1964, he set up this group called the 5%ers, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earth, and the 5% Nation, where they believe that amongst the population, 10% of people know the truth, but they want to, they don't want to enlighten the rest of the 85% of the population, and 5% know the truth, and they're trying to teach people, empower people about the truth of the world and things like that, right? So this group was an offshoot of the Nation of Islam, and there's a number of prominent, well-renowned African-American musicians and personalities who are 5%ers, and they self-identify as Muslim. And again, by them calling themselves Muslim, I'm not referring to like Sunni Islam. So when you might hear that, and that's again the reason why I'm defining these terms, because when you hear Muslim, especially if someone says it, you have to understand what they mean and what their ideology is or what their theology is. Now the 5% group, they believed that the black man was God incarnate, similar to the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam, they believed the original leader, Wallace Fard, was God incarnate. And they believed that Elijah Muhammad was a messenger of God, of Allah. Allah, the Arabic word for the one God. Now, the Nation of Islam, Clarence 13X, he disagreed with the Nation of Islam's teachings because he believed that the true God should be a real black man, i.e. because Wallace father and was mixed race, similar to Elijah Muhammad. He was of mixed heritage. So, and Clarence 13X, who was a quote unquote true black person, he believed that for God to, the true black man, the true God has to be a real black man, which is himself and everyone else and every other black person, kind of thing. So that's
what was Elijah Muhammad's ethnicity? Do you know? It was apparently he was partly Asian or something. Wasn't
yeah,
he?
there's part. I heard there's part Asian as well.
Yeah.
There's part Asian, but obviously in America he'll be considered to be black because of the whole one drop rule, right? But where Clarence 13X he differed with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam was because he believed that the real, like the true black man is God. So he believed every black person potentially can be God. Okay. Now, he then called himself Allah the Father. Now, again, from an Orthodox Sunni Islam perspective, this is heretical. This is not Islamic at all. But again, they've adopted these terms. That's why they're pseudo-Islamic. And it's important when you hear this or read this, you understand, obviously, their ideology, okay? Now, they believe that Allah is an acronym for arm, leg, arm, head. Right? Now, anyone who knows Arabic, knows how, unfortunately, like, way off true understanding of what Allah is, meaning the one God, but that's what they've used as an acronym in arm, leg, arm, head, meaning we are all God. Okay, so when I'm referring to, and again, the reason why I'm pointing this out, the reason why it's important, when you're hearing any of the Nation of Islam's, and this is why, if you notice, Malcolm X and a number of Malcolm X's speeches, virtually most of them, there's about 27 that I've came across from when he made the pilgrimage to Mecca to when he was assassinated. In virtually every single speech, he clarified what his position was in terms of not being a racist anymore and not believing in any form of separation or segregation, and his belief in terms of that he was Orthodox Muslim and he believed in Allah, the one God, the same God that the Christians believe and the Jews believe. And that's something that he stressed in virtually every one of his talks, even when he was talking to non-Muslims. The reason being is so people can know clearly that his views, not only his views in terms of race relations has changed, but his theology has changed as well. And one of the issues which we'll talk a little bit about during the talk, I know this has been like a really long introduction, but it's important because in terms of like the best interpreter or the best way of understanding Malcolm is from himself. He said, the book itself, a number of his speeches, if you wanted to know or understand his identity, is clear by listening to him himself. But what is important is which Malcolm you're listening to. Because if you're listening to a lot of his earlier works while he was part of the Nation of Islam, and a number of those speeches, that's when he was very fiery, he was very charismatic, even after when he became a Sunni Muslim. But I've noticed that they're the talks that are mostly circulated on social media, and most people are aware of, right? Now, again, the danger with that is that a lot of those views that he was speaking about, he rejected them after. So if you really want to understand Malcolm, you have to understand Malcolm the last year of his life, not the 12 years whilst he was a minister. But that is important to understand the Sunni Malcolm, right? Again, I know it's a very, very long introduction, but it's very important. I can't stress how important it is because there's times when I've said or I've spoken to people or people might say such and such is a Muslim, or Malcolm believed X, Y, and Z, or Malcolm was talking about black people as gods because their understanding of God meaning Allah, arm, leg, arm, head, right? Which is again from a Sunni perspective, that's totally incorrect. Okay, so that's just an overview. Now, in terms of understanding Malcolm's black and Islamic identity, like I said, the best person or the best way of understanding Malcolm is Malcolm himself, and that's why you can see what I've done. I've given, which I'll read out a couple of excerpts from a number of his speeches, which he gave from when he left, or during his time actually in Mecca, up until when he was assassinated in February the 21st, 1965. Now, one of his speeches on February the 15th, 1965, a week before he was assassinated, in terms of how did he identify himself? Was he and this is something that people ask, was he Muslim first? Was he a black person first? Was he an African first? Was he an American first? he identified himself, again, this is the Muslim Malcolm talking about, as a Muslim first, meaning someone who submits to the will of God, a human being who believes ultimately in the one supreme God and tries to live his life accordingly. And in terms of race and understanding race relation, that was something, not to say that that was important, but that was an incidental part of his character, his colour. But, and of which I'll talk about a little bit later, just the fact that he identified as being a Muslim first, it doesn't mean that he forego trying to fight for black people, and African Americans in particular, which that's something that was still part of his, you can say, his purpose, or he felt it was part of his purpose. Now he said, they know that my calling in life as a Muslim, number one, I'm a Muslim for which I'm proud, and in no way has that changed. My being a Muslim, my religion, Islam, and again, by Islam, the Sunni Islam. And he talks a little bit in an interview which he conducted with Gordon Parks a couple of days before he was assassinated. He was talking about race relations, and in that interview, I've left an excerpt in the notes for you to look at after, but he talks about even when he's speaking to a number of the African leaders, so after when he made the pilgrimage to Mecca, he went to different parts of West Africa, and he met a number of like Ghanaian leaders, Nigerian leaders, and even like Berbers in North Africa and Algeria. Now, a lot of the Berbers are, you could say, white, like very fair in complexion. Also, that dramatically changed his understanding in terms of race relations, because he saw people that would be considered to be white in America, but they were his brothers. And he talks about in his famous letter from Mecca that he received the same sort of hospitality and sincerity in terms of brotherhood amongst these quote-unquote white people as much as he did with the black Africans. So that's, again, dramatically his understanding and views of race relations. So, and this is something that, again, especially if you read the last couple of, listen to the speech, the last, I'll say, 4 months of his life, he also started to speak less about black nationalism. And not to say that, again, black nationalism meaning the advocacy of the civil rights of black people, is not to say that he wasn't speaking about that anymore, but in the conversation he had with Gordon Parks, he spoke about that racism is not just a black and white thing. It's not just between black people and white people. Ultimately, even when someone asked him 4 months before he passed away, what do you think is the cause for racism in America? He said 3 things: ignorance, greed, and a sophisticated system where Americans miseducate people, the education system. And he says, so just because you've got like colleges, again I'm paraphrasing here, just because you've got colleges and universities, it doesn't mean people are educated. And that's something that he wanted to let people know that, okay, although his main fight was for the upliftment of black people and black empowerment, he wasn't solely fighting for black people, right? And that's something, again, I think that we should, in terms of understand Malcolm's identity, first and foremost, was a Muslim. He was someone that considered himself a Muslim and also an African living in America. And that idea of being an African living in America, that came from his father more than anyone else. And his father was a Garveyite. And I don't know if anyone's, I'm sure people have seen the famous film directed by Spike Lee, where that phrase where his father, just, I think it's in the beginning of the film, where he's talking about I'm an African living in America, and Malcolm reiterated the same kind of sentiment whilst he was preaching for the Nation of Islam, and also when in a number of interviews when he became a Sunni Muslim. So it's not like when he became an Orthodox Muslim, he forgot about being African and it's just I'm a Muslim and that's it. I don't see race. He did mention that although he's a Muslim and Islam has caused him not to see the person's colour, meaning he tries to judge a person by their character, he's a realist at the same time. So the same way as me saying, because I'm, you know, I'm not sexist, so I don't see gender. Of course I see gender. So obviously, and that's why naturally you treat, well, maybe that's not right to say, but you treat a woman differently compared to how you treat a man. I'm a traditionalist in terms of respect, not you treat them less, but you see these things the same way in terms of the plight of black people in America. It's not the same as the plight of white people, and that's something which he was trying to address and also to enlighten black people. Can everyone understand what I'm saying? I'm not speaking too fast or anything, because again the most important thing is that you understand what I'm saying, and hopefully you go away from this talk not only, and I want to hear some of your discussions after, but I want to kind of, you know, see where everyone's at, kind of thing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, okay, so we know that Malcolm embraced Islam, But one thing, and again, just like myself as a Muslim, and this is something which kind of does, and that's why when I was speaking to Nadia, I wanted to kind of talk about this issue, is amongst the Muslim, or I would say Arab and Asian Muslim, predominantly Arab and Asian Muslim communities, I've noticed like a tendency when the topic of Malcolm X is spoken about. Of course, again, as Muslims will
Whitewash Malcolm.
I like, she's just very blunt. I was trying to say a nicer way of saying it, but
I've got a
no,
reputation.
okay, right, yeah, okay. So she doesn't hold back, mashallah. So that was my issue. It was this idea that people try and whitewash Malcolm, similar to when Muhammad Ali passed away. This whole idea that he transcended race and race wasn't an issue, even though he was primarily fighting for black people, and he was very advocate and very vocal in that, and was advocate for black people, even whilst he was whilst white people accepted him, or mainstream America accepted him. And it's similar with Malcolm X as well. Like and this is something that again I wanted to talk about, and hopefully not only I wanted to hear other people's thoughts about why that is, because that's something which I can't really understand. So I wanted to hear different people's perspective. Maybe I'm not seeing things or whatever, but it's just something that kind of bothers me, that when you have a number of predominantly non-black Muslim speakers talking about Malcolm, it's like they erase Malcolm X's struggle in terms of whilst he was during the Nation of Islam, which is important because you need to know, like I said earlier, Malcolm X, when he was during the Nation of Islam, and even prior to that, in terms of having lost his father at 6 years old, who was murdered by the KKK, his mum being sectioned in a mental hospital at the age of 13, that will have traumatic impact in terms of your upbringing. So again, not that I agree with the Nation of Islam, I can understand how they came about, and I think that's important, that we, even if you don't agree with maybe from a theological perspective, they did and are continuing to do a lot of good for the black community, which has to be recognised, and you can understand how it came about because it didn't come out of a vacuum. So I think that's, even as Muslims, even if we maybe don't agree with some of what they're saying in terms of about theology, we need to understand, like, in terms of the movement, in terms of the activism, and that's something that Malcolm was wanted to stress, which even after he became a Sunni Muslim, he was very much about activism, not just preaching. And this is illustrated by, he set up 2 organizations after he left the Nation of Islam, or was kicked out of the Nation of Islam. He set up a Muslim organization which was inclusive of everyone, irrespective of your race, but primarily teaching people about Islam. And he also set up an Afro-American, exclusively for African Americans, black empowerment organization to obviously educate black people, and also to deal with issues that are affecting primarily the 22 million African Americans in America. So I think that's very important, because he understood that he himself, and another thing as well, when people talk about Malcolm X during the Nation of Islam, and then when he became a Sunni Muslim, people say that the Sunni Malcolm was Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, when he actually was given that name when he was within the Nation of Islam. So it's not like he converted and then he changed his name. So that's another misunderstanding that some people have, because he was given that name whilst he was during the Nation of Islam. But he said when he was interviewed after he came back from Mecca that he wanted to he's still going to use the name Malcolm X, because that's the name that he's known by. That's the name that he's known by. If he was to go by Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, a lot of people, particularly you can imagine a lot of the African American who weren't Muslim, they probably wouldn't have gravitated to, because they maybe didn't want to, which they're within their right to embrace Islam, but they liked what he was doing in terms of calling for black empowerment and things like that, and in terms of his black activist struggle. So that's why he set up 2 organizations, and I think that's something that Muslims, when I'm hearing Muslims talk about Malcolm X, they talk about, like I said, obviously his famous pilgrimage to Mecca and things like that, but then in terms of his activism, his social activism, that's ignored. And that, in terms of, for me, in terms of a lot of Malcolm's greatness and why he's revered by so much people across the world, is the fact that he was willing to die for his beliefs, and he was very courageous in that. Not his Islamic beliefs. Again, that's not to say it's important, but that's why he's embraced by Muslims and non-Muslims. But again, that was just some of my thoughts that I had issues with, but I wanted to kind of, in the discussions, I wanted to maybe talk to a few of you after, kind of hear some of your thoughts in terms of why is it within the Muslim communities in particular, Arab and Asian, or Arab isn't Asian, isn't it? So I don't want to say Arab and Asian, but you know what I mean. They kind of whitewashed Malcolm, so we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail later. Another thing I wanted to kind of discuss is why is it that Malcolm X's Islamic or Muslim belief is often ignored by Pan-Africanists or Afro or Black nationalists. Has anyone read Destruction of Black Civilizations by Chancellor Williams? Excellent book. It's published in 1974. But one of the issues I had with that book, obviously being a Muslim, was, and not even being a Muslim, just even as an historian, was some of its the portrayals of Islam that I would say was inaccurate, and of the early Arabs. Now in the book, it talks about Islam as like being a white religion. So similarly how Christianity is seen as a white person's religion, Chancellor Williams in this book, and then this led to a number of other Pan-Africanists saying the same type of rhetoric in terms about Islam being a white person's religion, and it's not like an African religion, so black people shouldn't embrace this religion. So in this book in 1974, he charges Islam that it subjugated African blacks, and he identifies the Arabs as whites, by Caucasians. This book it then led to a number of other leading Pan-Africanists and Afrocentrics talking about Islam being a leading, you could say, Afrocentric crusades against Islam, particularly Black American Islam. And again, by Black American Islam, I'm talking about Sunni Islam. An example is Haki, forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Madhubati. He suggested in his book, Enemies, The Clash of Races in 1978, that Islam was part of the global white supremacist ideology. Another professor, Professor Santi, who coined the term Afrocentricity and defined its parameters in 1980, he proclaimed that Islam was in fact contradictory to Afrocentricity, meaning like Africa or Africans are the center of, like in terms of ideology or understanding the world. And another great historian, the late Dr. John Henry Clark, he also continued Chancellor Williams's approach to the subject in terms of seeing Islam being in contradiction to being a true African. And this is something which, even whilst I was in Brazil, and there was a talk about the Muslim presence in Brazil when I was there last November, and they spoke about Malcolm X as well, and the influence that he had in terms of, similar to the same way Malcolm X's conversion led to a number of African Americans embracing Islam, had the same impact not only in this country but also in Brazil as well. And there was a Pan-Africanist in the audience who was of the, I believe, of one of the Yoruba religions, the traditional Yoruba religions that's practicing in Brazil, particularly in northeastern Brazil. And he was talking about that. Why are we talking about Islam? Islam is a white man's religion. The same way Christianity is like a white person's religion. You need to practice a true religion. And this idea of the true religion is a true African religion. Now, one of the speakers at the time, he challenged him, and this is again something I wanted to talk about, is this idea of a true African religion. What is a true African religion? Because even Africa itself, how many countries are in Africa? And even within like one country, there's many different ethnicities, the different cultures, and the different religions itself. So this idea that there's this true African religion, and if you're somewhat becoming a true African, or if you're embracing your African heritage, therefore you should leave the religion of Islam. This is something that I have an issue with. Obviously, as a Muslim, I don't see myself as any way less of an African, because I believe in a religion that was established by an Arabian prophet, an Arabian man. Okay, because again, in terms of understanding, which Malcolm understood, in terms of understanding the Islamic religion, which is different to the Nation of Islam, there's no superiority between a black person, a white person, Arab or a non-Arab. And again, that's something that Afrocentrics or Pan-Africanists, when they're talking about Malcolm, you see that like Malcolm, when they're talking about Malcolm, they generally talk about the Malcolm that was in the Nation of Islam. And the Malcolm that was in the Nation of Islam is very different to the Malcolm that for the last year of his life. So again, that's why, again, when I said earlier in the talk, and defining these terms, it's important to understand which Malcolm we're talking about. If we're talking about the Malcolm up until the last year of his life, he rejected a lot of the views that he was saying during the 12 years while he was the minister of the Nation of Islam. But yet, those views are spoken about a lot by Afrocentrics and spoken about a lot by Pan-Africanists in terms of we need to create a separate nation for black people and things like that. So again, and this is something that Malcolm himself, which he did say he would reject. So it's just interesting why, despite Malcolm himself saying he rejects a lot of the views that he had, a lot of these views people still talk about as if this is like the true Malcolm. And then I'll talk about some of the myths, which some of the so-called Afrocentric myths about Islam, i.e. that Islam is a non-African religion, and it's a quote-unquote white Arab religion, and ultimately that Islam, similar to Judaism and Christianity, was derived from Kemet. So you can talk a little bit about that later. And another thing which a number of Afrocentrics talk about, and Pan-Africanists, is this idea that because of what occurred in Islamic history, like the slave revolts which took place in 9th century Iraq, when there was a number of black East African Muslims known as the Zanj, when they rebelled against their slave masters, the Arab slave masters. A lot of people, a lot of Pan-Africanists, and I've had many discussions with Pan-Africanists, they attribute this to the religion. Right? So the same way, and I think this is doing an injustice to religion, the same way I think it's an injustice for not only black people, but even brown people, whatever, to attribute what the transatlantic slave trade to Christianity. So because the Catholic Church, a number of Christians in the name of Christianity, they endorse slavery and the subjugation of black people, people attribute that to Christianity and say the religion is not for, Christianity is a quote-unquote white person's religion and it's not for black people. Well, going by that logic, then Islam is not for black people because there were a number of Muslims who, in Islamic history, who subjugated and oppressed black people. Do you understand? So I'm saying that type of logic is dangerous in a sense, because if you're going to go by that type of understanding, that's why Christianity is not for black people, then you, by the same understanding, then that's why Islam is quote unquote not for black people as well, which again, that's something which I would disagree with, and I think that's something that, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, that's something that you need to kind of think about when people talk about what is a quote unquote white religion or a European religion.
And there was different conversations that we had at previous sessions as well, actually, pertaining to this whole conversation of, I mean, how would you frame the subjugation of black people by, say, predominantly Arab people at the time? Was that actually essentially Islamic in essence, or was that actually just an Arab supremacist kind of essentially practice, you know? And if you see, obviously, the relationships of, say, even during the Prophet's time, the migration to Ethiopia and things like this, so these kind of conversations can go into it. But I think it would be really interesting to certainly pick up on that point.
Yeah.
The idea of, although we don't want to obviously focus all our energy on that because the conversation is quite broad and there's
Right.
other really interesting points that I want to pick up on.
Right.
But if we can come back to that,
Yeah,
really,
that's a. Can I
yes,
talk about it?
definitely. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a good point.
Because in the previous session, there was definitely a really valid point made by 2 points. One was the history of Timbuktu, which was a non-black brother made that point, and then a Muslim Pan-African sister said that actually it's very problematic to say, speak about the history of Timbuktu and say that, oh, apparently advancement in education was all in the name of Islam and so on,
Right.
And also I think that the slavery, which it was slavery practiced by Arabs, predominantly Arab slavery, right?
Yeah.
Because many pieces of literature essentially call it Arab slavery. They don't really call it an Islamic slavery. So it's actually framed in different manner because I would argue that the Arabs continue like a slavery even in parts of, I mean, they've enslaved Asians as well, and
Yeah.
we can have those
In
conversations
South Africa.
even today. And yeah, so I would like really hope if you can bring up that point, it would be really good to actually just address that.
Yeah, you actually. I wanted to go into that towards the end, but
No worries.
no, I'm glad you said that because what you said about, which I think is important, I just want to quickly expand upon it. And I think, I'll go into that now if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I don't want to structure this. I want to make this kind of more like a conversation, even though I'm the only one that's speaking. But in a sense where it's flowing, not just I'm going to talk A to Z and then
Sure.
you understand what I'm getting. But just expanding upon your point about, which is true, this idea of Arab slavery? Why is it considered to be Arab slavery as opposed to, or is it Arab slavery or is it Islamic slavery? Just a quick overview in terms of Islamic history, in terms of its dealings with black people, in terms of slavery. Now, when obviously we know Islam was established in the 7th century and then it spread outside the Arabian Peninsula and started conquering other lands. Now, when and this is something that a lot of Muslims don't like to talk about because there's some uncomfortable truths about Islamic history. When Islam spread, although Islam spread and is kind of seen as the golden age of Islam, a sense of Arab superiority started to develop amongst many of the Arab Muslims, which many people don't talk about. And one of the things which, again, although Islam was embraced Arabs, black people, Europeans, and also after Asians as well, what a number of the Arab Muslims did in the 9th century was, in order to become a Muslim, you had to join an Arab tribe. Which again, that's not from Islam. That's going back to Arab culture. So in order to become like a quote unquote proper Muslim, you have to align yourself with a certain Arab tribe and become like a Mawali. Which again, that's something that they introduced, but that's not part of the religion.
That's just an attribution.
Yeah, that's something that they introduced, right? Now, in terms of the enslavement of black people, the Arabs did not only enslave black people; they enslaved other Arabs and also enslaved Europeans. But they then they did target a number of black people, particularly the black Africans in East Africa. But that did, and some of it was primarily because they were black, and because they were influenced by theories from ancient Greeks that black people are naturally submissive to slavery, and they're well equipped in the Curse of Ham theory and story from the Bible and stuff, and they use it as a form of justification to enslave black people, right? So the same way you had that with the transatlantic slave trade, you did have that in Islamic history. Now, I wouldn't say that's Islamic because that's not from a religion, right? So that's why I would say it's Arab slave trade. The same way I would not say that what the transatlantic slave trade, which the white Christian Europeans, what they did to black Africans, I wouldn't say it's a Christian slave trade. I would say that it's a European slave trade. Do you understand? Again, I think we as we can accuse, and I think even as Muslims or non-white people, we like to point the finger at white people and Europeans and say they did this in the name of Christianity. But there were also Muslims who did similar things that you could argue that was in the name of Islam. But you wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. Do you understand?
Yeah, sure.
That's why I wouldn't ascribe, because I mean, even like the recent Birth of a Nation film, which was interesting if anyone hasn't seen it or even read the book. You had, and the reason why the film was so interesting, you had the slave masters who was using slavery to oppress black people, but you also had a slave who was using a Bible to fight against slavery. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So you can use the Bible the same way the Quran. You can use it to you can try and manipulate it and say it means this, it means that. But obviously, if you actually read it, it's quite clear. I would argue that the Bible somewhat is a bit more. It can be manipulated more than the Quran in terms of how you can subjugate slaves and stuff like that. Because there's some verses which is quite problematic when it's in the Quran. It's not that you haven't. But in saying that, slavery wasn't abolished by Islam. So slavery was still practiced in Islamic history, but it was done because of someone's race that came after a period of time, not because of the religion. Yeah.
And also, is it fair to equate Arab slavery with European slavery? Because is it not a different?
No, I don't. I think it's a different. I think again, they were both horrific practices, but I don't think you can compare the two in a sense that what the Europeans did was like chattel slavery. And again, just another thing as well that I think we need to as well, and I'm myself a victim of this as well. When we think of slavery and slaves, we shouldn't be thinking of black people, because that's a thing that comes to most people's minds nowadays. If you were to say slavery, slaves, you automatically think of racialized slavery because of what happened in transatlantic slave trade. Now I know it's troubling for some people to believe, but Africans enslaved Africans as well. Do you understand? That's what Arab enslaved. So again, I'm not trying to condone the practice or whatever, but when you're looking at the Arab slave trade, it's not the same. Again, I'm not justifying all the Arab slave trade. Arabs enslaving black people, Arabs enslaving Indians as well. And I'm not saying that is Islamic in any, but I'm not. But it's not. It wasn't racialized the way it was as what happened in the transatlantic slave trade, but some parts of it was.
It's an interesting conversation to have in contemporary understanding of like slavery as well, no?
Yeah.
Because when you go to much of the Arab world that does still, in my, how I would frame it, still practices slavery, and say in a lot of the Khaliji countries, there is a racialized element to it.
But I would argue it's not racialized, it's more about your tribe. So if you're not, because like in with the European slave trade, if you looked, like if you was non-white, they would target you, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the Arabs, obviously we know that some Arabs are very light in complexion, some very dark in complexion. A very dark in complexion Arab would enslave a more lighter in complexion Black African, not because he's
due to like class hierarchy and
because he's
other.
not from the same tribe.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that we need to understand, especially that's what I wanted to do in the beginning of this, is understanding terms. Now people use terms. So even when Malcolm X was assassinated, was it 51 years ago, the way they use terms is very different than we use some terms now. That's why it's important, before we kind of get into any discussion, you know, it might sound like it's this guy reading a dictionary, but you need to understand what I mean by certain terms, because I might use a term now, and we saw obviously recently what happened with, I'm not going to name the name of the university that that used two figures for Black History Month that were of Pakistani and Indian descent. Because again, then it's understand what do you mean by, whether you agree with it or not, but if you understand, if Black history or Black, you're referring to political blackness, there's nothing wrong with that.
I don't know. I think
If
the
you-
conversation is worth
That's
having.
a bit sidetracked, but again,
yeah,
it's just.
but I think that it's definitely worth like kind of exploring like what is meant by political blackness, and like to what extent it can hijack like genuine, obviously, like, you know, say African voices as well. So
But that's why I wanted to say, by me referring to Black during this talk and discussion, I'm referring to people of African descent, people dark-skinned people of African descent. Again, so that's again, I think that's important that you understand. So when I'm talking about Malcolm fighting for the plight of Black people, if you were to incorporate all non-white people within that, the problem with that is that, so obviously you're including people that even like Japanese people of fair in complexion, then you won't deal with the issue of, which he spoke about a lot, about the whole idea of Africanness or Africa seen in a negative light. And that's something that he wanted to address. That he, again, mainly talking to the 22 million African Americans, but by extension Africans across the diaspora, this idea that, and he spoke about, like, for example, the people in Brazil, 2/3, I mean, the reason he's brought, that's what even sparks some of my interest to go to Brazil as well. So he spoke about 2/3 of the people in Brazil are non-white. They're people of African descent, but this idea that people in Brazil or people in Venezuela or people in Colombia are not African because they speak Spanish or Portuguese. They're Latin or Hispanic, which is ridiculous. And people even today, they'll consider them, no, they're not Black. So a lot of African Americans will say that they're of African descent, they're Black, and then people of the Caribbean and Latin America, those who look exactly like them and have got the same makeup, are not Black because they speak a different language. Do you understand? So that's why it's important to understand, and that's something that Malcolm was trying to do, and he was talking about the whole idea of not only about colorism, but the whole idea of African what's that word? Characteristics or African features. Sorry. And I think that's something that's important, because he was talking about that. Why is it? And obviously we know that Beyonce used some of his famous speeches, which raised awareness, because he was talking about, again, the plight of Black women, and how the whole idea and the concept of beauty, and why is that we as Black people as well. And this is something as well which Malcolm X did do. And again, I think it's important to understand, he was definitely unapologetic, but he wasn't trying to preach to white people in terms of for them to accept us. It was all about trying to change the mindset of Black people or people, and then towards the end of his life, non-white people. You're trying to change your mindset, so this decolonize your mindset. So rather than trying to go to white people, Europeans, to accept us, it was teaching us to kind of accept ourselves the way we are and our God-given features, and embrace it and celebrate it, rather than like celebrate when a white person, you know, like says that we're intelligent, beautiful, and this, that, and the other. So I think that's something that's very important, and that comes down to also the whole idea of why Africa's always seen as a bad light. And it spoke about why the colonial powers, you know, they projected Africa with like savages and jungles and things like that. People wanted to escape the Africanness. I've kind of gone over the 30 minutes, even maybe 40 minutes. These are some rambling thoughts.
Sure. Is there anything important that you want to touch on the presentation before we get to the question session?
So what I said wasn't important.
No, I'm saying just any in the remaining. Because obviously I interrupted your flow.
No, fine. No, I mean the rest is quite self-explanatory. One of the questions which I had at the end, which I kind of spoke about as well, was I read an interesting article where someone was in the Telegraph, where, and I've heard this from other people as well, and this ties into what you were talking about the Arab slave trade and things like that. And I've heard this from a number of people that, because obviously we know that Malcolm X's life was one of evolution and change when he came across new material and new truths, and he wasn't scared to embrace his new truths. One thing that this particular writer said, and I've heard it from other writers as well, is if Malcolm X knew about the anti-black racism which exists, because to be honest, reading the letter from Mecca is beautiful, but it doesn't speak about the realities of anti-black racism which exists in the Muslim community. Maybe Malcolm didn't experience that. So what a number of this writer and other writers are saying is that if Malcolm X if he lived long enough to see the anti-black racism which exists within the Muslim community, he probably would have left Islam the same way he left the Nation of Islam. Now I would argue against that because, and again this is important to understand his identity, he wasn't someone who was a Muslim because of other Muslims, right? He wasn't a Muslim because other people's Muslims, and something that he did say even in his autobiography as well, especially after he found out about the infidelity of Elijah Muhammad, he realized that how dangerous it is to put all your faith in one person, or to believe someone is divine, which again from an Islamic perspective, we don't believe any human being is divine. So just because if he were to find out about the anti-black racism which exists unfortunately in many Muslim countries and has existed in Islamic history, I don't think that would have changed his perception about Islam, because he wasn't someone that was like, again, his faith wasn't solely based upon the fraternity of the Muslims. Do you understand? That changed his outlook in terms of his views or perception of whiteness, because like he mentioned, when he was in Mecca and he saw people that in America would be considered white, but he said like Islam had moved the whiteness from their understanding. Do you understand? Again, but the reason why he said that, and I think it's important, is because even when I speak to a number of even my North African friends, they don't consider themselves white. But maybe in America he might be considered to be white. So again, that's why I think it's important, because that changed, the trip changed his perception to the race relations, but not his understanding in terms of who God is. And again, you have to remember that he came from a religious background, with his father was a religious person, believed in God. So this understanding that, you know, if he found out about the practices of Muslims in the past, and like the Zand rebellion and all the rest of it, he would have somewhat left Islam. I would argue against it, because he was someone that was dedicated ultimately to God, serving God, not trying to serve and please human beings. And that's why he could always like change in terms of if new information came to light about certain people's practices.
Yeah. For real. Okay, thank you very much for.
What? Was I speaking too fast? A little bit. So you should have put your hand up. I should slow down.
It's okay.
We're gonna come back now. We're just gonna go around and we can definitely pick up. Are we okay, Santino? Yeah. Okay, you could just put it down, Santino. It's cool. Like, it's fine there, anyways. So obviously, we're really thankful for your presentation, and we're just gonna pick up on perhaps segments that weren't covered, and obviously we can relay back. We have the hour. Anybody want to go first in perhaps engaging with the speaker on a particular talking point, or even sharing their thoughts on the topic?
Yes. Yeah, well, you said that the European slave trade, it wasn't like based on Christianity, but like the British, when the British did the slave trade, they used the Bible to justify the slave trade.
Yeah.
Did they not?
Yeah. No. Well, maybe I didn't explain myself properly. It was based on Christianity, but what I'm saying is I wouldn't say because of excuse me, because of the practice of some Christians, I wouldn't ascribe that to Christianity. There's a difference. So so they use the Curse of Ham story incorrectly to justify the enslavement of black Africans. Now if you read the Curse of Ham story in the Bible in Genesis, it It doesn't mention that Noah enslaved Ham and his descendants with blackness, but some you could say creative interpreters, they misinterpret that to say he enslaved them with blackness and slavery. So this idea that black people are should be enslaved by Europeans and using the Bible to justify it, if you actually read the Bible, it doesn't justify that. But people interpreted it to suit their own means to enslave black people. Now again, because they justified, I mean they use the Bible to justify their action, I wouldn't ascribe it to Christianity. Because I would say Christianity is free from that, the same way I would argue that Islam is free from some of the oppression which happened to the black Africans at the hands of Arab Muslims. I'm not going to say that they're not Muslims, because do you understand? Again, that's why I'm saying that I wouldn't ascribe that to Christianity, not to say that they wasn't Christians.
But yeah, the Hadiths though,
right,
they do have racism in it.
Sorry?
The Hadiths have racism.
Which
That's
Hadiths?
what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question and said that. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote my first book of dealing with the whole concept of anti-black racism in Islamic history and in some Islamic literature. Now, if you can give me some of the hadiths, because some of them are fabricated, and that's what not many people are aware of. So there's some hadiths which hadiths is a prophetic tradition where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said there's no good in black people or the Zanj. When they steal, they fornicate. When they're hungry, they steal, and when they're satiated, they fornicate. Now that hadith, even though it's widely circulated among some Muslim communities, it's fabricated. He didn't say that. So if you're just picking up a book by some people who are attacking Islam and said, so that's one hadith, right?
Is that quite dangerous?
So that's why, again, when we're speaking, and again, I'm glad you said that, but it's important for you, if you're, you've made an accusation, I would say, okay, bring that.
I'm not making.
No, okay, but you've said that. You said the hadiths are racist.
Yeah, I said.
Now I'm saying that. So I'm not meaning to like be rude or anything, but I'm saying that. Okay, bring me in a hadith where it is racist.
I see it.
And then it's either, because I've gone through a number of them. If you can show me one that is racist, then I will hold my hand up. But I haven't seen it, because most of them are either fabricated or it's interpretation. For example, there's a hadith which says that obey your ruler even if he's an Ethiopian with a raisin head, right? Now some people have taken that hadith to say, oh, this is the Prophet Muhammad, or this is Islam disparaging black people. Now if you read the interpretation of that, you have to understand again the context. Now the Arabs at the time, even though they had relations with these East Africans, they used to look, you can say the position of the Arabs, especially the Arab aristocrats, they will look down upon an East African or black African, right? Because again, not because they're black, but in terms of understanding their tribe. Yeah? You with me? Yeah. Right? Now, by the Prophet saying, obey your ruler, even if, because he's using, again, this comes to understand Arabic, he used even if it's like a poor Ethiopian, he's not saying that there's something inherently wrong with being a poor Ethiopian or poor black person. He's saying, even if it's someone that you don't expect. And the purpose of that hadith is to emphasize the importance of obeying people in power, because you don't want like fitna, you don't want discord, right? Yeah. So again, it's understand the context. It's not saying that something's inherently wrong with black people. Do you understand? I'm getting it. So there's a number of these hadiths, and again, I'm not trying to attack you or anything like that. Okay. There's a number of these hadiths which people assume are racist. Number one, because they haven't understood the context, or they're reading it with a racialized contemporary mind, and that's why it's important, like I tried to do in the beginning, understanding how people use terms then. Do you understand? I'm getting that. So but again, if you do find the one that had, please let me know, but I guarantee you it's either fabricated or it's the context, like, which doesn't actually mean which it looks like it means if you're reading it from a 21st century lens in a racialized world. And that's why I think it's important that when we're reading historic texts, we need to understand how they use words then, not how we understand words, because we're going to do injustice to them and ultimately to other people when we're propagating some of these like ideas.
No, I wasn't reading anything. It's just
It was just, I think you were just basically bringing up a point that maybe has been made in certain circles or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. People make those, but again, and this is where it's important for us to educate ourselves and not understand how people the past, because again, I'm trying to give examples of only 50 years ago how people use words differently, and how words change over a period of time, and even nowadays. And that's why I gave the example of like in Jay-Z's song. So you can hear it like an African American rapper that might say he believes in Allah. Now, what he means by Allah, he's talking about himself. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So that's why it's important that you understand how people use words and what they mean by certain words. And some of these words do change over time. So if you're just picking up a book, particularly a historic book, and you're understanding how people use those words, then you're going to misinterpret things, right?
And also, just on the whole religious conversation, whilst we're at it, the idea, there's certain sort of descriptions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, of having African features, no? And the fact that there are prophets that are black within Islam, so Prophet Musa and so on. If you could just touch on that a little bit.
Okay, so there's, like in Islamic tradition, I mean, in terms of how many prophets there are, there's nothing that clearly is by name. There's between like 25 to 27 mentioned in name in the Quran. But in Hadith literature, there's a report which suggests that there's 124,000 prophets. Some of those are, so a prophet is someone who's sent to his people to inform people about, the message, meaning that there's only one God and to follow the messengership of that particular prophet. Now there are prophets sent to people, to Indian people, there's prophets sent to black people, to all people, right? But we only know, like I said, either 25 to 27 mentioned by name in the Quran, but there's some reports that even some of the prophets that were mentioned in the Quran, some of them are said to be black Africans, like Luqman, and the prophet of the people of the day. So this idea that, and I think it's important, is that this idea that Islam is somewhat anti-African, anti-black. Islam is not for black people. Islam is solely for black people, sorry. It's not solely for Arabs, it's not solely for white people, it's from Islam perspective for everyone, right? But again, in terms of, or like the point you mentioned about like Musa having like, reported to have like kinky hair, or, I mean, the idea of the prophet, I mean, my only issue is because as much as, yes, you want to talk about or fight anti-blackness, you can go to one extreme and then start saying, which I think is very dangerous, and start saying everyone is black in Islam. And yes, we know there's traditions which state that from Islam perspective that the first person on this on Adam is black, from the word Adam, which means like dark brown, and Hawa means dark or like black. But even if they were black, from an Islamic perspective, that's irrelevant. From an Islamic perspective, and that's something which even Malcom was stressing, that when he was talking about like race, again, this is Muslim Malcom, that it's incidental to the person. And that's something which even as we as black, brown people, or however you want to self-identify, you don't want to go to one extreme where you're just going to start speaking about how white people are just like evil and this, that and the other, because of the injustices that some, not all, white people have done. Do you understand? So it's about trying to be balanced. And it's quite a difficult ground to tread on, because again, you want to empower black people, brown people, but at the same time, you can then fall into the trap which many people have of just disparaging or casting aspersion upon white people because of some practices which some white people have, and saying that's a reflection of the whole kind of race and ethnicity.
What about Christianity's link with colonialism and missionary sort of movements that were partaking, and their sort of oppression, you know, on subjugating black and brown people?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just saying that I think that Christianity does have a certain colonial history, and although even Arabs have obviously had inquisitions and so on.
But I just think one thing we have to be careful of is distinguishing between the religion and the people who adhere to the religion or claim to adhere to the religion. So, like you said, we know Christianity has there's this link with colonialism, but are we now saying that because of what a number of colonialists did in the name of Christianity, that's a reflection of Christianity?
Was Christianity indigenous to Africa?
Well, there's recently.
Is that conversation?
There is that conversation.
And how did it come to the African people?
But you know what?
In what manner?
I recently went to a talk with Professor Anthony Riddy. Because
I don't know how useful it is also to be an apologist for, say, Christian missionaries.
No, I'm not being an apologist. No, I'm not being. What I'm trying to say is, like, so for example, this idea of, yes, we know that Christianity, in terms of Christian history, in terms of like what a number of Christian missionaries did to black Africans, we know about that. But one thing which, again, I wasn't really aware of, which when I went to this talk and Professor Anthony Riddy, he was talking about black theology, and again from a Christian perspective, and he was talking about like Saint, I think named Saint Augustine. He's an African. Now he was talking about even within the Christian world, they don't talk about that. They try to like whiten him, they whitewash him. Now he's celebrated, but they don't talk about his Africanness. Do you understand? This was way before colonialism. So there is African and black theologians who are celebrating Christianity, but they don't talk about their Africanness or their blackness.
But isn't that sort
Do you
of...
understand? So but I'm saying, if we're going to ascribe colonialism to Christianity because of what some Christian missionaries did, then why don't we also ascribe what, like the great works of black and African theologians to Christianity and say that's why it's a quote-unquote African religion? Do you understand what I'm getting at? And I mean, my issue with this whole idea of, because something didn't originate from a place that's not, it's not a quote-unquote African religion, by that logic then Islam is not an African religion. And that's what I don't see an Arab.
But that is a genuine position that is held by, like, obviously Pan-Africanists.
Yeah, and that's why that's what I wanted to talk about, that this idea that, and even when we're talking about Africa, the continent, some people include the Arabian Peninsula within Africa. They say that's part of Africa. Again, that's some people's interpretation. And even the word Africa is derived from Ifriqiya, which is a city in Tunisia. Now, the people in Tunisia, again, in terms of understanding blackness, are they quote-unquote black? Do you understand what I'm getting at? So you're going to go into all of these, who is black and then who is real African, because the ironic thing is, although a lot of North Africans do not consider themselves to be African because they see Africa as like sub-Saharan Africa. Africa derived from a word which is a city in North Africa. And it was from a European person that named it Africa. So it's like, okay, me call myself an African, I'm basically like the son of a white man. Did you understand what I'm getting at? So this, as much as this can sound kind of contradictory, I'm talking about blackness and the importance of like black empowerment, but then at the same time I'm talking about that it's irrelevant. And that's something that, again, if you read or listen to the speeches towards the last year of Malcolm's life, it sounded like a lot of what he was saying previously was important, but at the same time he was defending what he was saying, if that makes sense. It sounds contradictory, but it's not in a sense if you look at it from a position of, no, because he understands the plight of black people, especially in America, so he's addressing it and trying to change their mindset. So he has to talk about the importance of black people and the contributions black people have made, but ultimately he's saying like your blackness is not what makes you a better person. And also, do you understand what I'm getting at? And so again, like I said earlier, it's quite a dangerous line because you can go to one extreme or the other.
So it's just best to take a nuanced position.
Yeah, it's best to take a nuanced position and just be objective. This try and be will biased. Don't get me wrong, but try and be objective. And the same way, when we say things, particularly about Europeans and things like that, try and let's in the other way. If you was in their position, is it fair if they were to say the same thing about your religious beliefs or your ethnic tribe? Do you understand? And you probably wouldn't like it. But generally, when you're not in a position of power, you can always attack those in power, even if your argument is not justified. Do you understand what I'm getting at? I think you can get away. It's easier to get away with it, even if it's not justified. I think that's something that we need to kind of be careful of. The same as a man, I'll be honest, right? I can hear. Obviously, I'm a man, so I'm in a position of privilege naturally over women generally in society. So when I hear a woman complain about maybe like sexual harassment and these type of things, because I don't identify with it because it's not my experience, I can dismiss it. It's easy for me to dismiss it, but it takes time for me to actually listen and let me understand where she's coming from. And the same, so that's me as a man. I can understand that. That's why I can not agree, but I can understand why a number of like maybe white or Europeans, they find it difficult to understand the position of like oppressed groups, whether they're black, Muslim, African, whatever.
But I don't think that when you're having these conversations, there should be any appeasement of those kind of... Because as Malcolm, he was unapologetic in his message, and he obviously was able to effectively deliver...
and he wasn't a pacifist, which I think is important, which I didn't get to talk about.
I'm just going to get to the sister here.
Do you have a difference between the Afro... Do you have a difference between the Afrocentrism?
Afrocentrism?
Afrocentrism, yes. I don't know in English.
Afrocentrism?
Yes. on the Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
Do you have the difference between?
Oh yes, that's a good point. I didn't define that. I saw that actually on the train as well. And I was like, oh, anyway. Probably someone can correct me, but my understanding of Pan-Africanist is someone who believes. What's the definition? I should know this because I went to Pan-Africanist school when I was like 9. Is it someone that believes? Can anyone help me out? I'm struggling. It's someone that believes like. Someone that's trying to connect with people of the African diaspora. So, because I'll trying to give a good definition.
I can draw in James here. It would be nice to have like
can
how
you give a nice
I think in your segment, did you not touch on perhaps like the? I don't know if it was touched on that session, but if you can kind of just bring in a little bit of how you understand Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
I suppose I saw it. I read it more as like a sort of global position of Africans.
That's it. Yeah.
So like which included maybe those Africans in the diaspora as well as the indigenous Africans. I suppose the Pan-Africans wasn't just the movement too much.
Yeah, and it's kind of like seeing us all as one people, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a very
the Afrocentricity of Afrocentricity was more about highlighting the uniqueness of the African or Black experience.
Yeah. So did everyone hear that?
No.
Yeah, can you repeat that again because that was well said.
Sorry. I suppose Pan-Africanism. I suppose I read it as just a global kind of standpoint or a global kind of position of Africans, not just.
Pan-Africanism got anything to do with like one nation, like United States of Africa or anything?
No, but saying that we all like people of African descent, like I mentioned earlier, like the people of Brazil, Cuba, we're all one people, irrespective.
That's my point. I think Stokely Carmichael kind of in a debate between him and Asante was more about kind of emphasise the organisation of Africans.
Yeah.
Not with this kind of overarching view of forming a nation, but more just trying to confront the problems that Africans face all over the world. So it's maybe kind of a stage prior to maybe like the sort of black nationalist ideas.
Yeah.
Because I think Afrocentricity seems less nationalistic and more kind of, I don't know, kind of worldly. Which to say that the uniqueness of African people wasn't couldn't be kind of addressed in Africa. Like the African experiences were unique, whatever.
Okay, so I'm just going to draw. Sorry, can we? Are there any other? James, do you want to ask any questions or any talking points to the speaker?
I'll wait. Somebody else wants to.
Sorry, is there anybody else? Any speaking points? We're going to come back to this side, but if we can get you, James, first, if you have anything to say, and then I wanted to just bring in a few points that I jotted down.
Thank you for your talk. And it was just.
Sorry, James, is it a bit cool if you can raise your voice?
Sorry, I'll do the mic. Yeah, I suppose I just had these thoughts about the kind of distinction between blackness and black life.
Yeah.
I think just kind of an important decision, just let you know. Because I think Malcom, especially towards the end of his career, after Malcom, where he became more pluralistic, as you could say, in his outlook, and more considerate of the state of his perception of racism and white people, etc., and black people as well. I think that I think that's what I read the distinction there between how black life could be accessed by anyone, or could be experienced by anyone. That blackness wasn't this kind of otherworldly kind of phenomenon in the world, which had to be kind of objectified, categorised, and contained, had to be structured within already pre-existing apparatuses within society and the economy. But black life was something that was sort of integrated within the fabric of sort of American life, or the experience of Black Americans and white Americans as well, which is interesting. Which I found very interesting when he was talking about, in one of some of his interviews, he was talking about how he will welcome anybody, white people, anybody who was willing, at least to kind of help alleviate the conditions of black people in America. Which is a vastly different kind of kind of request, politically, that he would have, which kind of not problematized, but kind of diluted the kind of discussions of about racial pride. He still had racial pride. But this racial pride was something that was more of an individual kind of self-conscious sort of understanding, rather than a political doctrine or anything like that. And so I suppose I was just thinking initially I was thinking about this distinction between black life and Islam and where that fits in, because I'm not too well read on Islam or anything, but I just find it interesting how where he did advocate his commitment to Islam, he became more fervently Islamic. He no less kind of addressed his affinity with it through the prism of the black experience, and so, which is quite interesting. I think it will highlight for me that Islam being kind of religion of brotherhood, but one which could be addressed through different eyes, and it's not this kind of metaphysical notion of the one and the many. It's just loose thoughts like that about how Islam is conceived of and sort of accessed.
I think it's interesting. You've raised a number of points. So I was going to say I was going to start from the first point. I'm actually going to start with the last point that you raised. But the idea of which you said about, or Malcolm's view of Islam, and he did mention on one of, I think it's in one of the hands, but he did mention that he believed that obviously believing in the oneness of God and obviously the oneness of man in terms of brotherhood, that could alleviate or eradicate erase the human cancer of racism, because obviously to see that we've come from the same experience as obviously as human beings. But in saying that, which is to point out, the black experience is, or the white experience obviously is different. Like we all come from different experiences. But the only thing I would say is, and I don't think he saw him becoming more religious or more Islamic or whatever. Any way that meant that he's not going to be defending black people, fighting for the rights of black people anymore, because ultimately Islam, and how a number of Muslims view Islam, is religion teaching people that you should fight for justice, whether for Muslims or even for non-Muslims. It's about ultimately teaching justice. You understand? I'm getting that. So, and this is something that I think even evolved his way of thinking about when he was talking about, after his discussions with a number of the leaders in Africa, that he wasn't looking at racism just about like black and white. It's more about fighting for justice. Do you understand? And I wouldn't be surprised if later, if he lived longer, he would have been fighting for like other minority groups like women and things like that, irrespective of their colour. But he, like he said in a number of his speeches, although he was a Muslim and he didn't view race or didn't see people's colour, he was a realist. And even when he's speaking about the plight of black people, he always speaks about his main concern is the plight of the 20. He says it so many times, the plight of the 22 million African Americans, because that's where he's from. That's not to say that he's not fighting for the plight of black people in Brazil or black people in the UK, which he was aware of, but that is his main concern because that's where he's from. He understands them more than anyone else. Do you understand? And then, obviously, when he travelled, then he realized, and that's why, coming to the whole concept of Pan-Africanism, he was trying to connect with the African brothers in Africa and African brothers in parts of South America, but ultimately he was trying to defend or fighting for the rights of African Americans. Obviously, that's where he came from. I don't think him being a Muslim or, like I said, becoming more religious anyway kind of deterred him from that struggle.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that.
I think it refined it, if anything, and I think just coming to the point, which you made, which I think is important, even the idea, and he mentioned, and he says one of his regrets was, and it was shown in the film where he said that a young white girl came to him in the restaurant and asked, "What can I do to help?" And he said nothing. And then actually he did mention that I think is when he spoke to Gordon Parks 2 days before he was assassinated. That was one of his regrets. And then so that's why even with the organisation, the two organisations that he set up, he did allow white people to help but not join. Why? Because if you're letting, and I can understand, because if you've got an organisation that's about black empowerment, and again he spoke about the idea that when it comes to serious things, we always go to white people, and you see it in this society as well. When it comes to entertainment, music, you know, we're the main people, but when it comes to serious things, we want to go to someone else. So in order to, even for black people to overcome this, you need to have black people in power, so they won't think of, when they think of intelligence, they think of white people. When they think of slavery, what do we think of? We think of black people. That needs to change. Do you understand? I'm getting that. So him having this organisation where it was exclusively black, but he did say white people can help, but they can't join. Do you understand? So his views did change, but ultimately I think people need to understand that even as a Muslim or as a black nationalist or Pan-Africanist, and when you was talking about the experiences of like blackness and black life, people can relate to it because everyone has been oppressed. So even if you're white, rich, you can relate to like the black experience of oppression, for example, like in America. But ultimately, to some, I say you can relate to it, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the same. The same way I can relate to some respect or understand what a woman goes through, but I'm not a woman. I don't understand her experience. So it'd be wrong for me to put myself in a position of a woman's forum and speak on behalf of women. And I'm not going to be helping their struggle if they're trying to empower themselves. Do you understand? I'm getting that. But that's not to say that men shouldn't be, I don't think that's not to say that men shouldn't be able to join or not join necessarily help. The same way, like I think that was like Malcolm's understanding why he's with the Afro-American Unity Organization. He was exclusively black, but he said white people couldn't help, which obviously prior to when he was in Nation of Islam, he wasn't help. He wasn't going to white people. He wasn't using them to assist them with anything. But I think that's a couple of interesting points you raised.
I think my point that I had in my head was that I think when he was making that address, the interview about being open to contributions, that it wasn't I don't know, it wasn't like a question anymore of just being moral. That that the moral standards have completely collapsed. And even within the Nation of Islam, even among black people, there was no way that it just got to a state where black people couldn't really help themselves. And that I think that was the sort of reality of Americans. I think that they can't help themselves because their inability to help themselves even was a symptom of a broader problem, a global issue, or that wasn't a racialized thing. It was just a problem with the inadequacy of human moral conscience, and so it was more, I suppose, an ethical kind of thing, which is to say that an organisation should be like for black people, but then this organisation has to be understood kind of outside of the black experience. But at least its end goal shouldn't just be the discipline of black people.
Right. Okay. Then tell me
more. It shouldn't be a sort of a moral question between just because I can't shit like so it's just like why isn't this happening? Why are we doing something? But I suppose it's more of a problem of action.
No, good points. I like that. Good to think.
So there was some talking points. Sorry, did you want to engage a bit more, James? Or and are there any other points that you want to raise? Aya, any points?
Back to me. You come back to me.
I'll come back to you. Okay, sure. And we've just spoken to. So I wanted to perhaps just raise a few things. We're actually having the Nation of Islam at a session That will be quite controversial for some, I'm sure, but I want to engage in conversation with them. I think it's very important to invite them and speak to them, and we're having the Europe representative, the European representative throughout the entire Europe. Actually, the minister, I'm not sure what he calls himself, the Minister of Europe, not quite, but the Nation of Islam minister, who's good friends with Farrakhan, will be speaking actually at a session, and I'm quite interested in having a conversation with him about black separatism. And I don't know how we can look at black separatism in the contemporary understanding, or say how we as non-black subjects of, say, a state such as Britain, how we can position ourselves within this state in kind of looking at the idea of black separatism. I would say, because I was speaking to an Iranian friend of mine who was speaking about how black separatism can be seen as very, very important and quite revolutionary, in the sense that how would non-black subjects, non-white subjects in a white supremacist state as Britain position themselves, so they wouldn't engage themselves in, say, the party politics, or they won't necessarily want to become complicit in, say, a reformist political sort of work, but rather separate themselves from this dynamic and engage in a conversation kind of similar to how we're doing today, and try to have an understanding of our position in the but to try and escape this Eurocentric kind of positioning, you know. So yeah, that was a bit rambled, but I think black separatism is so important, and for me it's just very like revolutionary and interesting, and I still really highly regard Nation of Islam on a political level, even in the US today. I think Farrakhan's position in relation to the elections is revolutionary, and I definitely think that he is intelligent in some of his work, and how he frames a lot of the oppression of black people in the US, and also Europe and elsewhere. So yeah, I think he's very important. I have disagreements on a theological level, but on a political level I hold them in very high regard. In fact, Dr. Khalid Mohammed, he was in the obviously Nation of Islam and also the Black Panther Party. He was an amazing revolutionary, and I'm like in love with him. I think that he said some amazing things, and he's like, you know, represents a very revolutionary kind of politics in relation to black separatism. So can you maybe engage a little bit on black separatism and how we should take them seriously, and how on certain issues that the Nation of Islam, even on social justice movements, and they're doing kind of projects in the UK in relation to the family unit, and they're kind of promoting this idea of like the black family and other kind of projects as well. So
okay, probably going to be like rambling thoughts, because there's a lot that you spoke about. If I'm honest, I don't agree with like the whole black separatist or black nationalist ideology.
So how is it understood? Like
okay. I'm sorry, I was kind of coming to that. I was kind of my issue is, and I think it's important, especially us in the UK or us in Europe in particular, actually, not only us in the UK. American history, in terms of especially understanding race relations, is very different to the UK and Europe, and I'm sure we're aware of that. And even in terms of understanding blackness, and I think one of the issues is that a lot of non-white people in the UK, we adopt the American model in terms of race relations, and we try to, and I see it as what, so the solution in America might work there, it might not, it might, I would argue that it won't necessarily work here. Why? Because, again, understanding their history with the whole one drop rule, and if you've got a drop of black blood, you're considered to be black, and the whole idea that you have a white or, they're generally white or black, that idea is not, we don't have the same structure in this country in terms of understanding race relations. That's why I don't think that will necessarily work, right? Because there are many mixed race people, there are many people of like Asian descent who do not identify, and rightly so for whatever reason, as black. And this idea that they have to identify as black because they're non-white, when in America they might be able to align themselves with whiteness because they might be considered, or even North African. Like even recently, there's even like some uproar in America because in the American census, if you're an Arab, you're considered to be white, right?
Yeah.
And then now some Arabs are saying that there should be a separate category called MENA, like Middle East of North African descent. Now, even then you're going to go into the problems of, okay, if you are a North African, if you're from like Morocco but you're dark in complexion, some Moroccans are dark as me or darker. In America, you'd be considered to be black, but according to that census, or according to the census now, you're white because you're an Arab. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So who is, like, my issue is what is blackness against?
But are they Arab because they are from the Sahara and the Sub-Sahara?
I'm sorry, what is an Arab and what is blackness? I mean, are you an Arab because you speak the Arabic language? Are you an Arab because your forefathers are from the Arabian Peninsula? And a lot of Arabs, particularly in like North Africa, are Berbers. They're not even They're not Arab, but most people. But most people, most people are ignorant of that. So this idea, and I think it's so. For example, Berbers are not Arab, and some may consider themselves to be black, and some may not consider themselves to be black. Where are we going to put them then? And so to clarify, my issue is that to say that everyone should be called black, it's problematic because if you're fair in complexion, so you're white, you're very fair, you are white. Descriptively, you're white. Why should you call yourself, say you're black because you live in Africa? And then what do we mean by whiteness? Is whiteness just mean you're of European descent? And then if we're talking about European descent, what part of Europe? If you're from Turkey, you might not be considered to be white European because you look too much like an Arab. I mean, that's my issue because I think in America, again, because in America, it's different in terms of how non-white people are treated. So you're categorized as black. I don't think it necessarily, it doesn't work as well in other parts of the world because we haven't got that same history in terms of like race relation. I think when we try to adopt the American model or their understanding of blackness, we can learn, because again we need to create our own, again not to say that we should work for them, but I don't think you can just copy everything what's going on in America, their strategies and their solutions and think it will work out, because not everyone, even amongst black people, there are some, even speaking to some of my relatives like in Nigeria, racism is not an issue until you come to this country or the West. Like they're not talking about race. So this whole idea of alignment with blackness, they're talking about their tribe. If you ask them where they're from, they'll say I'm Yoruba, I'm a Hausa, whatever. And similarly in the other African countries, they're not talking about I'm black. It's only when you're a minority in a racialized country, then you understand like what blackness is, which is really a social construct. And again, within Africa, and this might sound controversial, but even in this country, you've got, and it's so ridiculous. You've got some or many people of West African descent and Caribbeans who are considered to be black, and then if you're from East Africa, you're not black, you're Somali.
Is this term used here as black minority ethnic?
No, but it's even amongst us how we use the term. Who is black?
Yeah.
Do you wanna? I want to say something.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Like what you're saying about that, like within
within ourselves,
East African community, there's a huge issue. Yeah. Like, with the older generation, you tell them they're black, they're not black.
They're not black.
They're not going to accept that they're black.
Yeah.
But what do they identify as Arab or?
They would say they'll have Arab descent, but they would say they're Somali.
They're Somali.
They're Eritrean, they're Ethiopian, but they're
not black. And even even amongst a number of like quote unquote black, like West African or Caribbean, they're black, but they're not. But so you got black people, and then you got Somalians. It's ignorance. Yeah. But I'm just saying, even amongst ourselves. So if you've got even amongst the black community, not everyone is embracing blackness. How can you then say this is the solution for black people?
No. So I think you misunderstood how I interpreted.
I'm not saying it to you. I'm just saying in America that might be the case because they're all considered and regarded.
But I wasn't talking about actual separation from the state in a physical form. I was talking not engaging with, say, reformist political ideology. So, i.e., you're separating yourself from, say, the institutions, the structural.
No, I agree with you, but I'm just saying that if the people themselves, they do not embrace that identity, how do you engage with them?
That's a really
that's like if they're saying, oh yeah, all us black people, and I'm not black. Who you engaging? You're engaging yourself.
But I think that's where Pan-Africanists would
but then
put their
sorry to cut, but then even this idea of Pan-Africanist or Pan-Africanism, are we saying, because that's again similar to the one drop rule? If you've got a drop of African blood, therefore then you of African descent, because if you're 10% African descent, but 90% of European descent, are you African?
Is your loyalty with?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got the answers. Don't get me. But I'm just, these are things which when I hear
I
it,
would
it's
say
like,
more critical sort of theorists from Pan-Africanists.
I'm saying with when I read a number of Pan-Africans or when they talk about black people, again they're speaking from like anyone from their perspective and their social environment, and generally from America it's very different to the UK, or even like for example Brazil, which is like in terms of understanding self-identity and racial relations, it's like America but in steroids. So if you're going to try and adopt that American model, that two white and black, and use it in other parts of the world where they themselves self-identify as black, you're going to do disservice to them. You can't then say no, you are black because in America you're black.
Yeah, that's where I was saying the whole Eurocentric Western narrative is quite
so
sort
did you wanna?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about certain things about like the whole concept of how we construct race is very problematic, just on a general basis, right? And then we're talking about like Malcolm's identity as a Muslim.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole complexity to that as well.
Yeah.
Just because within Islam, I think there's this huge. I mean, everyone like kind of talks about it, but I mean, again, it's this whole concept that we're taking a very Western, Eurocentric idea of race and translating that across, which is very problematic.
That's what I agree.
Because the way we understand race in Islamic history, or even like contextually the way Muslim societies are, it's very, very different.
Very different.
So like, I mean, it's kind of like one person was saying that in Mauritania, for example, where a form of slavery still exists, you can have someone who, will look like us, black, in skin and stuff, but they will be considered an Arab. They're considered an Arab, right? But someone who might be slightly, shades lighter would be from a family that's come down in slavery and they're still enslaved.
Right.
I mean, they might not have that slavery but they know, like, they descend from them. So I think it's very, like, so coming back to, I think the way we understand race in the West and in Malcolm's identity of how he identified as a Muslim and as a black Muslim, it is very problematic if we start putting that into a Western context and how race has evolved in the West, I think. And also I think the other thing that I've been thinking is just the issue that I'm not sure whether this is a Western Muslim issue, but the way we see as the black Muslim identity is very, like, I don't know why we're always questioning that, but the Arab Muslim identity or the Asian Muslim identity isn't questioned as that. I don't understand why there's a question as to, the level of your religious identity associated with your race. And I feel like that's very much a Western problem again, because when you go to Africa and you see how Islam has been practiced, like in East Africa, West Africa, where Islam's been there for a very long time, it's evolved to its own culture as well. And there's not, that question isn't being raised. There isn't an Arab Islam. There isn't, that Islam. So I feel like, again, this is something maybe we need to assess as, black Muslims or like, Arab Asian Muslims living here in the West. How do we understand Islam as well? And culturally, I feel like this is where the whole issue is, like, there's the religious aspect and there's the race identity, if we want to see it. And I feel like that will take a different interpretation depending on the context you're in. So, and that's not something to say that, oh, this is something wrong. It's just natural that you have the theological beliefs, but it's going to take a different identity depending on where you're in. So those are just thoughts I've just been, just thinking that, like, why is it still problematic? As not just only a Muslim community, but just generally I've seen even with non-Muslims questioning the whole Muslim, black identity. I don't understand why that is, point of contention in that way. So
No, really excellent point actually, and I'm so glad that you raised it, because this is kind of why we have these conversations actually. So this is exactly why we have these conversations, because I try to invite across the board. We invite Pan-African, Afro-pessimist voices and academic voices, and then you're an author and you've got your own, research that you've done on the ground and things like that. So we're very much engaging with voices across the board for this particular reason, because that's why even in this group, we are a decolonial education initiative, and we invite all, you know, critical, respectful dialogue. So it is really, really great that you brought that up. And if you want to engage with that, actually,
I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, and it's just got me thinking as well. And I think, like you were saying, I think it's mainly a Western problem.
Yeah.
It's mainly a Western. It's mainly a Western problem, not.
But then what about Mugabe? What about Mugabe's, you know, sort of like Mugabe's made some very strong. I'm just thinking, you know, I'm thinking that. What about on the world stage when you have African leaders say?
No, I know, but I'm saying it's like if you listen, and I was thinking about this yesterday when I went to watch.
Because you can look at it from a geopolitical perspective.
I'm saying when you're in the West, when you're a non-white person, you think about race a lot.
Yeah.
When you're in Africa, you're not thinking about the white person. Do you understand? It's totally. And again, just when I watched what's that film that came out with Lupita?
Queen of Katwe.
Queen of Katwe. The reason why I found it so refreshing was because obviously 90% to 95% of the characters were black. Race wasn't an issue. You're just seeing characters. When I'm watching most films, and I thought it made me question myself, when I'm watching most films
but isn't that
from
Disney's
America,
objective?
No, it's not because of Disney. It has to do with Disney. And it was actually a good film. My point is that when I'm seeing any film in America, obviously in the UK, I'm naturally conscious of the black representation. How black people, why is it the black person's the thief? Do you understand? I'm thinking about that. When I'm watching a film, which was like the Queen of Katwe, it's all black people. I'm seeing the thief, I'm seeing the good person. I'm not thinking of race. Do you understand? I'm getting that. And I'm saying because we live in, obviously we're the minority, we live in a racialized society, we sometimes think about it, you could say we think about it too much, but it's our experience. Because you cannot not help but feel, you know that you're black, you know that you're Asian, you know that you're not white, because it's seen everywhere. Do you understand? So it's going to reflect how you view things. But I'm saying that if you're in an environment where you're all like the same colour, you don't think about things the way we see it.
And I think to a certain extent, like you mentioned, like that's so true. I've noticed this because just talking to my parents, they're from East Africa, Somali Kenyans, and just the way they grew up in the concept of race and identity and religious identity, the way it's transformed over the years within just that region. It's really interesting to just to sort of see and understand. Like over there, I mean, it's a tribalistic, just like any other part of sub-Saharan Africa, tribalistic. You know, every like different tribes, different religious groups. But it's interesting. Of late, there's this whole new Muslim kind of persecution of that region, which if you talk about when they grew up, it was not as much. They were not aware of these things until the whole colonial, thing that happened, and like independence, and even like now, like just seeing the foreign politics that's going on, like the influence on that. So it's interesting to see that, that in itself with globalization and how it works and how, Western powers have so much influence over there, it's being translated across to Africa itself. But these were not issues that our grandparents were having necessarily.
I mean, it's just funny you said that, because I'm now thinking of my parents, and when I speak to my parents or people that's around their age, race is not an issue. And even again, just coming to your point, Nadi, about understanding blackness, amongst a number of West Africans, amongst Nigerians, an Asian person is considered to be white. That sounds shocking. Yeah, exactly. No, it's true.
No, I mean they may well have that.
In their understanding, and even when the language that they use, they'll describe an Asian person the same way they'll describe David Beckham. In terms of the ethnicity, like seriously. Now we might look at like that.
But what about the ethnicity within Asia that have like African descent?
No, I'm just talking about their perspective. So that's why I'm saying, if you're going to talk to them about all the black people together, and you to bring people of Asian descent, they'll be like, I'm just saying that's just their experience, because when they're looking at anyone who's basically you could say dark skin, like with strong African features, is not even it's not black, it's just white, and they don't say it in a derogatory manner. They just do you understand what I'm getting? They don't demarcate between Western European, Eastern European, and East Asian. No, they're all white. They're all like the other. Do you understand what I'm getting? And that's the language that they use. So it's interesting, even like I said, speaking to people from different parts of the world and how they view things, because like Ayan said, we can't help but westernized, and the way we view things is very from a Western perspective, and obviously we've got the issue of the social construct of racism and stuff like that, which we can't get away from. But I think in order to come out of that, we need to speak to people who do not, and that's why travelling is important. Because you'll find that even people from different parts of the world, they do not self-identify with this whole kind of concept of blackness the way, especially how black people identify with blackness in America. And because, and I'll argue the reason why so many people in this country identify with the whole concept of blackness is because of we share the same, because like America's kind of seems like Britain's cousins, and we've got a similar like language. And I always mention Brazil. The reason why is because their view of race in terms of like Afro-Brazilian is very different to like Americans, and like obviously British people. And again, I would argue because they haven't been exposed to the African American understanding or perspective of race, and obviously their history is very different. So I think we need to kind of also speak to other black people or non-white people, shall we say. And I think even why don't we call ourselves brown people? Because if we're going to say brown people, you can say technically that's more accurate because we are all different shades of brown. Do you understand? Rather than coming under the concept of like or black. But again, that's just some thoughts.
I mean, there was just one point, so on that, because it's really important, and then I will get to you. When I position myself, I'm mixed ethnically speaking, so I'll have an Afghan, Pakistan, whatever, Pashtun or whatever heritage you could say. When I position myself, say when I go to northern Pakistan, where obviously my ancestors were colonized by Alexander the Great, but they're not so great. Obviously, you know, if you have a look at certain indigenous tribes from North Pakistan, in which my mum belongs, they have like blue eyes and they're basically very fair, but they're not white people, obviously, and they don't actually have European genes either. And they were colonized, you know. And I would say that when you go to Pakistan also, it's like when I kind of am engaging in conversation with certain ethnic groups positioned in sort of post-colonial urban areas, in Lahore, which was very, you know, it has colonial remains and the buildings are all there and so on. And when you kind of engage in conversation, they have this fascination with being white, and they have this obsession with whiteness and, you know, the whole fair and lovely construct. And basically, I think that it's very important also when we're engaging in in sort of conversation with whiteness and white supremacy, that we look at things not only through people's experience, but through history and historical facts and colonialism, and obviously other brutal kind of sort of brutal historical incidences that obviously evolve from white supremacy. And I think also into contemporary understanding, how we translate the history is how we position Africa, Asia, that was looted, pillaged and economically crippled by Europe and European settler states. I think that we should also kind of look at how African people are positioned on the world stage, how Asian people are positioned on the world stage as well. And ultimately, fair enough, Pakistan could be a member of the United Nations, but we hold absolutely no traction. If we translate it to Hegel's, like, you know, the whole master-slave dialectics, ultimately the master is still the European and the white man, you know. And I think these are the contemporary political. So when we look at blackness and engaging in
so to cut you off, instead of, I think ultimately where our shared struggle is, whether you're of African descent, Asian descent, or whatever, is fighting white supremacy or European supremacy. That's where we can all, I think, come together and agree on, because that's
and
the
anti-blackness within
Asian. I agree.
It's resisting.
But this is where, and that's why I was saying, trying to define what you define, trying to define blackness, because if we're going to use black or blackness meaning political blackness, meaning incorporating everyone, then you won't fight anti-blackness within Asian communities because we're all the same, just not an issue. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
I mean, is anti-blackness a product of colonialism? Is it? I mean, there's
this is the thing. I mean, this has been an issue. The whole issue of anti-blackness has been an issue even in Arab communities before the Europeans came into. And that's something which I spoke about in one of my books as well. And that's something that this idea, and that's why I'm saying we
but
can't
the Arabs
always,
had a very supremacist.
Yeah, but the fact that was an issue before the Europeans came into the Muslim world
we can't blame the Europeans like they're not. We can't blame them for everything. That's my point. Do you understand? Because it was surprising to me, because if you were to ask me 10 years ago, you know, what's with anti-blackness, how the Europeans, colonialism, Western imperialization, stuff like that. When I found out about obviously the anti-black racist sentiments in classic Muslim literature or Arab literature before the Europeans came in, I'm wondering where did this come about? Do you understand? I'm getting
how did it come about? What's the psychology?
Yeah. But it's an issue. It's a problem.
But I mean, but colonialism certain changes the direction in which this.
I think ultimately it's about fighting white supremacy. So even in terms of intellectualism, we look at if you've graduated, if you've come from like a quote-unquote prestigious European institute, which again is subjective in terms of what you're studying and the methodology and stuff like that. That is more superior than coming from them studying in African or Asian institute. Do you understand? Irrespective of whoever taught you. So even ourselves, we've been colonized, we've been conditioned. We can't get away from that. But then there's also a case of trying to question how we've been conditioned, and then try and even. So when we're having these kind of discussions, you start to think and reevaluate your own thoughts. Because I try and do that on a regular basis as well. Because I'm not going to try and pretend that I'm not conditioned. I don't hold some, you could say like white supremacist beliefs, in the sense that not I believe that they should be on top, but subconsciously, does it affect me? Of course it does. Do you understand? I'm getting that. So it's all about trying to have these type of discussions and speak to different people and then travel, whatever, and then reevaluate ourselves, and then obviously we can help others as well. Because one of the things I've noticed is that a number of like people that are fighting white supremacy and stuff like that, they make it as if they've not been conditioned at all.
No,
definitely. We have to admit ourselves.
But I think
and that's where I think
unlearning that toxicity.
I think that's where Malcolm's life was so, for so many reasons, so inspirational, because he questioned himself and he was able to reevaluate. And that's very difficult, especially when you're like in his late 30s, and to be going across the country and even across the world preaching something, and then to say that I'm wrong because you found the truth. That's very difficult. That's very difficult. So that is, if anything, should be something that I think we can all kind of learn from and draw inspiration from. And the fact that he also, when he was in prison, said that he wasn't one thing, that he was someone that's dedicated to studying and knowledge and reading, and he would gladly, even as a 30-year-old man, I think, or his late 20s, go back to high school and sit with like 10, 12 year olds. How many of us would be willing to do that to acquire knowledge again? Do you understand that kind of that bravery in terms of like not having an ego and stuff like that? So I think that's important.
So yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh
yes,
God.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So like,
But we will come to you because you haven't spoken yet.
You're saying like the Americans, they don't see themselves as over here they don't, like, people don't see themselves as black. Americans don't see themselves as African. Like, they see themselves, like, some of them, like, as black Americans. If you ask them if they're African, they'll say no, they're not.
But that's what Malcolm was trying to address, this whole idea of why, because Europeans have projected a negative perception about Africa, people want to escape to Africanness.
But as for like people wanting to lighten their skin, it's like prevalent all over Asia and things. Like, it's like people over here that want to get a suntan, I think, personally.
No, it's absolutely not. It's a product of a deeply entrenched self-hate and colonialism.
Thais do it,
and it didn't exist pre-colonial times.
Thais haven't been colonized.
Yeah, I don't think
that's arguable. I mean, it's questionable as to whether we can. Okay, sorry, we're gonna come back to that conversation.
I just would like to come back to Malcolm X. Have you finished the book?
Sorry?
Have you finished to read the book?
Have I finished reading it? For myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read it.
So what did you learn from
number of, what did I learn from it? It's good, when I first read it when I was about 11 or 12. Yeah. That's a good question, actually. But the reason why it's a good question is because when I read it, because I've read it obviously at different stages, I've read it about like 8 times, I learn different things, because obviously my different stages I am in my life or whatever. But one of the things which stuck with me is to be proud, obviously, of your Islamic faith and obviously your African heritage. They're the two, because again, as a Muslim and of African descent, that's something that helped me a lot when I first read it, like at 12 years old or whatever. And also not being afraid to learn and study, even if you don't know something. That's there's so many things. What else did I learn? One thing, actually, probably one of the most important things I've learned from his life of the book is his bravery and his willingness to sacrifice. It's probably one of the most admirable things I admire of him, is that he was willing to sacrifice himself for his beliefs, and that's something that very few people are willing to do. It's easy to kind of say things when you're in a safe space, but when he was even getting death threats, after they firebombed his house with his wife and his 4 daughters in the house, he still was willing to speak the truth against how he's sitting. That was just like, that is what it was just remarkable. Just like, wow, like he really believed in whatever he was saying, even during the period when he was in the Nation of Islam and after. And he was able to, like I said, when he was left the Nation of Islam and then went to Mecca, he reevaluates, he always question himself, and that's something I think as we as people, you're never too old to learn something new, and to kind of retract some of your statements or your beliefs or your thoughts. And another thing, there's a lot of things I've learned from him. An appreciation of black women, because I'll be honest, his book, it did, because it was a lot of what he was saying, I felt like he was speaking to me, that you have been conditioned the same way why you appreciate certain women over certain, but so again, especially speak as a man, obviously living in the West, why you value certain women over certain, that look a certain way, and so again, to make me think, why is that? So there's a lot of things, but ultimately it's just a case of there's a lot of things. That's a good question. That's a good question. But depending on where I was at the stage of my life, it was different things that I learned. But ultimately, it was as a Muslim, to be proud of my Islamic faith. Number one, that's something that he ended on, which despite talking about everything that he's gone through, all praises due to Allah. So that as a Muslim resonated with me, and then his African identity and willingness to kind of always educate himself and self-educate as well. So not educate, necessarily go to university. He was autodidact, someone that's read and taught himself. So it's not about, of course it's good to go to university, get these degrees or whatever, but you don't need someone's validation to become knowledgeable. And I think that's something that, just reading his book and listen to some of his speeches that I learned from him. That's a good question.
Thanks. Ayan?
So yeah, I just wanted to add to that. That's a really, really important point. I was listening to a talk on Malcolm X, and it was an amazing thing that the speaker was saying that one of Malcolm's, I guess the biggest thing you can learn from him is the fact that he taught himself. Yeah. And Malcolm even criticized the American education system, the college, the prestigious colleges that educate people, and his way, what he was saying, that the amount of time he spent in reading in prison and educating himself was probably far more than those students who went to Harvard, Yale, Brown, who are supposed to be the well-cultured, well-read, individuals. So I think a lot of the times, taking that personal responsibility to educate yourself, to read everything out there, to challenge yourself, and get as close to objective knowledge as much as possible, is probably one of the greatest things that you can learn from Malcolm. And given his background, his evolution as a character, as a person and a character, how he's gone through that, I think it's so important to learn that. The concept of self-education. I think that's probably one of the reasons that makes Malcolm, as for me, personally as a character, someone who transcends race, religion, all this thing. This is kind of humanity in its greatest kind of form. So I think definitely adding to that point of self-education is so important.
Did anybody else? James? Always value his input. I think that sometimes you pick up on things that perhaps people don't. So do you have anything else to add?
Actually, I don't, it's just everybody else. But I think Malcolm X, I think he's one of those really important figures, especially in the black radical tradition, whereby he was just one of those people who set out to redefine standards of moral and ethical behaviour and stuff, but at the same time, to emphasise the validity and the legitimacy of black life, which is to say that for me anyway, just he wasn't an Afro-pessimist. He wasn't saying black life is just it's just this kind of dead horse that we should flog. That if we stick with it, if we stay within the conditions, that's the only way we're going to actually change. Change black life for everybody, not just for black people, but for black life in the people. Which is to say that black life is synonymous with white life and American life. Which is to say that slavery is important, colonialism is important. That's being objective about it, but also using these facts to look ahead, to be progressive and futuristic.
Thanks. Do you want to engage with that, or can I bring in another really sort of question that is like burning? So basically, the conversation that we had slightly earlier, the idea that actually, how do brown people engage in sort of black struggle, because, for example, and I had a conversation with Clee Benelli. Unfortunately, we didn't have it in a session. It had to be filmed because he was unable to attend a session, and he was only here for 2 to 3 days, and he's originally from Arizona in the US, and he's of Native American, he's Native American, or you could say, yeah, let's call him Native American, let's go with that because it's the most commonly, it's a common term, and I guess everyone will know what I'm speaking about. So he's Native American, and obviously the US as it is a settler state. It's a European settler state, and it's built obviously on the mass graves of Native Americans, and Clee Benelli spoke about the Holocaust of the Native Americans, and it's not only the North. Obviously the Holocaust happened in the South, in South America as well, and Latin is actually the term used due to colonialism, so I just go with South America because I think it's a sort of more appropriate term, although obviously Seminawak is the term that they refer to South American continent, so Native American people, so engaging in say the genocide and also the Holocaust of Native American people, and how they were brutalized by the European settlers, how do we engage with colonial history and sort of basically this sort of very brutal incidences that obviously came about in history? How do brown people, and me, as I said, I'm from the Asian continent, and our colonial brutal history, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and then we have the African Holocaust in Congo, and arguable other genocides and things like this that resulted due to Europeans. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that how can we engage in conversation with the black struggle, because I think often being Pakistani, like there's not much sort of anti-colonialist sort of resistance from Pakistan, from what is known as Pakistan today, basically. And I seek a lot of my inspiration from black revolutionaries, Dr. Khalid Muhammad being one of them. And I guess what I'm saying is, but then again, as you said, there's much introspection that I need to do and ensure that I never am complicit in, because I never want to be complicit in any sort of form of sort of whitewashing black resistance at the same time. So I guess what I'm saying is, how can we engage in this sort of struggle as a collective without diluting down any sort of form of black resistance? I guess it's engaging the complexities of the struggle and.
I think you're doing that. What you're doing now and the work you're doing, and the reason why I'm saying that is because you're not. So you being brown, black, however you want to self-identify, Asian people, right? And like you said, the whole kind of, because this is something that I've never really understood as well. And this is something that I kind of wanted to speak a little bit about. Is that why is it? Because I know a number of Asian, and when I do a number of events, funny enough, most of the people that attend and most of the organisers are Asian, are not black. When I go to most universities, whatever, the blacks, most of the black students are interested in partying, Afro-Caribbean society. They're not interested in learning about the history and stuff like that. And I was one of them, so I'm not going to start speaking. But but a lot of the, and that's why even when I saw the whole issue with Zayn Malik and Sadiq Khan, I was kind of troubled by it. But then at the same time, I thought to myself, do you know what? Most events that I go to, Asians support as much, if not more, than black people. If I'm honest, and not doing it because they just like you said. So in terms of trying to identify with figures that are resisting like white supremacy and European imperialization, stuff like that, they can relate to a lot of black figures because they're the ones that are speaking out against it. And I was thinking to myself, I can't think of many Asians that speak out against it. So I don't know, like in terms of what you would do. To be totally honest, the only thing I could say is when you're dealing with issues within the Asian community, because you know the community better than anyone else. You know how to. Do you understand? You know where people's minds are. The same way, like when Ayan was mentioned earlier, and I was speaking about our parents. Could you convince them to talk about the importance of blackness and race? You couldn't, because it's for them. It's a non-concept. Do you understand? So the people that are affected by it, which are mainly people that are living in the Western society, and especially young people, because they're conditioned from a young age. That's where I would kind of. Because you wouldn't want them to have an inferiority complex. I'm saying, but for older people who I'm not saying you ignore older people, but it's a non-issue to them. Or like as my dad says, you're talking about racism and stuff like that. Where I've come from, it's blacks are killing blacks, and to come from how again, I'm not saying Nigeria was in a really bad situation, but how it is now, they don't mind coming here and suffering racism. That's again not to say that racism is fine, but me born in this country, grew up in this country. I'm not going to start saying you should be talking about racism and decolonialism because it's not an issue from where they've come from. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
But is it though because of the history? From
where they've come from, I understand, but for where they've come from, because ultimately most people, they just want to better their lives.
But didn't Malcolm speak about this? Didn't he speak about the educating about our history?
Yeah, but who's he speaking?
Not necessarily.
I agree, but who's he speaking to?
That's but not necessarily to obviously saying that we do this whole preaching thing.
No, not preaching, but like I said, he was mainly speaking to African Americans.
But did he go to Africa? He did.
Of course he went to Africa, but I'm saying when he was going to Africa and he was speaking, and then he was going back to African Americans.
But that's just how he was positioned, you know.
No, but my point
didn't choose to be positioned.
No, my point is he was trying to connect. But I'm saying that if you're going to Africa and trying to teach them the importance of African history and things like that, and they kind of already read it, but it's not that important. They just want to better their life. It's
because that's different. Survival. They have no choice, right?
It's not even it's not survival. There's a lot of people in Africa that's living like, especially when you see stand up. I'm endorsing that Queen of Catway from the reason why it's so good. You saw rich Africans, you saw poor Africa. There wasn't just. Do you understand the stereotypical image of Africa being poor? So when you're looking,
I'm speaking about say.
But my point is that for Asians or like non-black people, I think the people that are like passionate about fighting white supremacy and just need to be honest in terms of their own community and in terms of need to be honest in terms of tackling their own community. Because one thing which I always ask like some of my Asian friends, my wife, what do you say behind closed doors about black people? I just want to know. I'm not going to get offended. A lot of people won't tell me because I just want to understand. Okay, how do you get this type of thinking? Why do you think like? Because it's endemic in the subconscious, or not even subconscious. It's in many people's psyches that black people, whether it's an Asian community, Arab community, the Chinese community, that black people are the lowest of the low. And
so have you traced that psychology? So you were saying it's not a byproduct of colonialism, which is a credible.
No, some of it is. But I just want to know, like, even those who are educated, they still have this, like, black is at the bottom, and those who are even fighting against this, they're not like having an honest conversation with myself. And I was like, okay, I'm not saying that you are racist, but why? What do they say? But like, what type of things do they say? Do you understand? I'm getting that because there's a number of people that, when it comes to entertainment or even education, they don't mind listening to a black person.
But they do say, and I can guarantee they say in the Asian community, I know what they say. They might not say certain sentiments in front of me, honestly, because I don't take shit. But I will be saying this though. What I have seen is that if they don't overtly display anti-blackness, they definitely display the whole worshipping the whiteness. Do you understand? The whiteness is a construct, Eurocentric beauty ideals and everything. So you see this in the psyche of like many
I
Asians.
mean, the only thing I would say
and that's more, that's a lot more prevalent, and they can be open about it, and they might not necessarily hold back on it, if you know what I mean. So you can see that form of self-hate, and obviously the way they would treat dark, and we have very dark South Asians, and I was speaking about the Sidi tribe, which obviously they're from Africa, Southeast Africa, and I think it's Southeast Africa and East Africa anyways, but you have this kind of ongoing, but I think we're not talking only in a sort of we're not talking about say so where you're positioned geographically, but rather across the board. Also, yes, across the board, how we can even engage in say a Native American.
Oh right, okay. For me, it's for me to understand, because I understand. No, I don't understand the extent in the sense of what's happened to the indigenous people of the Americas. Do you understand? So that's where I need to listen, because the same way, like for example, we talk about what's happening, like police brutality in America and what they're doing to black people, but what's happened or what is happening, what's happened to indigenous Americans, not only in North America but South America, we don't talk about. So that's where again we need to, those coming from those backgrounds or those who are better educated, I'll need to listen, not to just talk about my own
because I think his history is vital to
but learning from someone's perspective, because history is what's the saying, it's written
history is
it's
from
written by the
perspective as well, and a broad voice, because this is what I tried to, as I was trying to say, I want to invite people from an entire
and it's good that you're doing that, because naturally, like, and I'm not going to make no claims I'm objective, because I'm not. No one is. But I'm coming from a perspective, and you've got other people come from a perspective, which is good, and then you can, the more different perspectives that you listen to, then you can make your own opinion, make your own informed opinion, which I think is important. So you're doing that. So that's what I think you just need to continue doing what you're doing, and everyone needs to continue doing in terms of trying to eradicate, ultimately through education, but different ways. Some people could be social media, some people's different, it's conversations, but you know your people, community better than anyone else. It's not for me to say this is where you have to tackle it. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
And just on a really quick point, in relation to the point you made about Africa being rich, absolutely, and everyone knows that who studied history that Africa was very rich.
Was and still is.
Still is.
Yeah, and still is. Was and still is, just to be clear. But I wanted to make a point, but it was and still is, however, colonialism did economically cripple
to some respect, yes, but we need to stop making excuses, because if you go to...
No, I'm not speaking about excuses, I'm talking about from a structural...
Yeah, yes, I agree, but...
Just a structural...
Me as, like, a Nigerian, I'm troubled that I can go to Nigeria and you have the nicest house, fattest house you can imagine, mansion, everything, and right next to it you've got
But
people.
Isn't this why I was trying to, just if you let me, allow me to finish, my actual point was why I used the term survival, because I'm always speaking to the working class people. So I noticed that you haven't actually made a critique of class struggle.
No, but I think it comes down to what... sorry, I forgot his name. James said about, not even just about blackness, it's about human beings. And what I mean by that is that some people, I'm not saying people in Africa are more greedy.
But what about class struggle, i.e. working class? When I'm speaking, I'm always speaking to the working class people in Asia, the working class people
But you know, some of those working class people, even in Nigeria, if they became the middle class or, you know, the elites, they will behave exactly the way elites are behaving.
What do you mean by that?
So it's a set mentality.
It's mentality.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
It's a set mentality.
That's the thing. It's the mentality. So, like, obviously, naturally, when you
people saw poverty 10 years ago behaving exactly the same way as the elite do.
Exactly the
so
same.
It's like
and that's what needs to change.
But there's also a set mentality within ourselves.
But I'm not talking about psychology. I'm talking about a class issue. By the way, just for the camera, we changed memory, and I had people in the past accuse me of editing out certain conversations. I have not edited out any conversation. That was a memory change, by the way. Okay. And I tried to get it all on camera because I've been accused of certain things.
But I think it's good, but having these different conversations, also got these different perspectives.
I would just like to say, right? You want to know what Asians say behind closed doors about black people, right?
I'm just curious.
And you can't speak for all Asians.
Not Asians,
please do speak.
Yeah. What do Africans say about Asian people behind closed doors?
A lot of what Africa, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all Africans or black people, but generally, like say for example, amongst Nigerians, right?
Yeah.
okay, I'm generalizing here, but a number of Nigerians might make fun of West Indians, like Caribbeans, because like they're not as academically inclined. That's the perspective as Africans, right? But it's not like a hatred. They might prefer that their sons or daughters marry someone from their same ethnic tribe, but the hatred, I don't really. I don't know. Maybe I can say. I don't really
sorry. Whose hatred are you speaking about?
Amongst black people. I don't really.
Amongst black people towards Asians.
To other racist. I'm not saying black people. I'm not racist, but I don't know what is. But so many
it's
racists.
not racism. There might be some.
No, there's some black people are racist. They might think they are superior, but
yeah, but I don't think racism.
I mean, okay.
I don't think black people can be racist though.
Coming to my definition, I said earlier. You see, that's why.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? This is why I define.
Oh wait, right. Yeah.
You see, because now when we think of racism, we think of structural racism. And that's why people say things like black people.
Yeah,
can't
but
be
why
racist.
don't you just use the term xenophobia?
Because that is the definition of racism, Oxford Dictionary.
You know, this is not.
It's the definition. Yeah,
this is all context. Honestly, it's all context.
Yeah.
It's interesting we're having this conversation. Go to certain places, forget race. We're talking about tribalism.
Yeah.
You come down like this is all structure.
Yeah.
And it's all like context that you're speaking of. So I think that's the danger of like generalizing and getting a broader like attitude towards all of this, because it's very dangerous to do this. Like we're speaking about this like that. Go to, for example, probably Yemen or Somalia, right? You're talking about tribes.
Tribes, yeah.
You're discriminating people. This is ways the whole racial construct works, depending on which tribe you come from.
Yeah.
So the concept of race doesn't even exist for them. Like they could be looking the same, but just because genealogically you're from the wrong tribe, you're gonna be completely just alienated in that way.
But the only difference with racism is that because, again, racism in terms of the belief, not structural racism, because you can, if you're judging someone by the way they look, you can't get away with that. The reason why I think, like, if you're black, right, you're always going to be black. What I mean by that, if you're mixed race, or if you're Arab but you're politically black and all the rest of it, you can chop and change when it suits you. If you're black, like black African like myself, I can't be nothing but black. I can go to any, and that's why it's different, because you can have someone that's a strong advocate for black people but very fair in complexion, but they might after I want to try something else, and they can blend into mainstream society. No matter what I do, I can dye my hair, I can wear different nose piercing, I can wear an earring, I can wear different clothes. I'm still going to be looked at differently because I'm clearly African. That's why that's why I wanted to, again in the beginning, define what I mean by black and not use the political black term, because as much as yes, I think it's important that non-white people come together, I can't come across as something that I'm I can't come across as being someone that's something that's not of African descent, basically. Whereas basically everyone else that is kind of racially ambiguously looking can.
If you've got rid of the social construct of race, which is like in terms of nation and stuff like that, you still have peoples. So like you have Semitic peoples, you have Caucasians, Indo.
But you wouldn't know where they're from. But okay, an Arab, right?
Okay. An Arab is Semitic.
No, but I'm saying Arab can go to someone like a different part of the world, like Venezuela, for example, and they can possibly can blend in. An African, whether you're from Senegal, no matter where you can be treated a certain way. That's my point. So, and that's why it's no other people have got that apart from black people, or clearly African-looking black people. That's why it's an issue.
Is your concept of race a biological concept then?
My concept of race? No, I don't believe in the concept.
I
don't believe in the concept
of common thread.
No, I don't believe. No, I don't believe in the concept of race, because as we know, it's a social construct. But I'm just saying that.
Yeah, but
isn't
black whiteness a social construct? So anything.
No, it is.
No, but you said like an American going to Venezuela.
Okay, what stereotypically? What is that? No, what I mean by stereotypical in Africa, because even how I'm using terms, you can be a North African, like I think. Yeah, and sorry, I'm not using that. I'm not me use you as an example, but which I am. But you can go to Brazil, fit in, and she's Brazilian. No question, where are you from? What's her heritage?
Yeah, but
you can come across as being Spanish from different parts of the world, even American, and you can blend as she looks. I'm always going to be considered an African. I would, she would, and Ayan would. even yourself, I don't know where you're from, but just again, I don't. You could be.
My grandmother's Kenyan.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying it in a. I'm just saying that you could pass off as an Arab, you can pass off as an Asian. Do you understand? So you can blend in. So although you might be politically black and advocate for black people, you can.
I don't know if
you can take your foot off the gas if you wanted to. That's just being honest. I couldn't. So that's why it's different. It's different for black Africans. Do you understand what I'm getting at? It's a total different, especially like the issue of like black beauty and stuff like that, because as much as people want to kind of defend it, they can, okay, I want to try something else. Because if you're like a black woman, you're a black woman. Do you understand what I'm getting at? That's why I think other races, I don't think they've really understood.
So is it just based on perception? Because if I look,
it's
Asian,
not it's
Arab,
not perception, because it's reality.
Because I'm a black, I'm an African as well.
No, you are, but yeah, sorry, it's perception. You're right. So it's perception because I might perceive you to be okay. I don't know where you look Brazilian. How come you're Brazilian? You look. Do you understand what I'm getting at? You could be African. You could, and you can blend in and not have those issues because of the way you look. Whereas if you're black African,
but that's from a black African perspective, not from a Brazilian or an Arab perspective.
What do you mean not from Brazilian?
Like that's just your perception.
What do you mean not from a Brazilian perspective?
Like a Brazilian. Like
okay, in Brazil,
I've met Brazilians who see me as an African person.
Okay, in Brazil, the more African you look and darker you are, the more discriminated you are against. I've been to Brazil 5 times. I spent a number of months in Brazil, and that's the reality. So even though a number of Brazilians look like sometimes a complexion, and in Brazil I'll be considered to be black and you'll be considered to be black, you'll be treated, even you can pass off as white, which I didn't go into in terms of understanding blackness. It's not only race, it's hair texture. So the more finer your hair is, the more you can kind of jealous. And I'm not trying to say that you're less black. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that when you're clearly black, you can't escape it. If you look racially ambiguous,
between the perception of blackness, and the treatment, and the class.
Okay, so the treatment. But I would argue
class
that
structures. They're not two separate things. They're actually symptomatic of the same phenomenon.
But I would argue that the treatment of I think we're going to go into probably another. I hear what you're saying, but I'm just conscious of time. But this has been really enjoyable. I've actually enjoyed it because again, if I've said anything that has offended anyone, so what? I'm joking. But it's important that we have conversations, and again, just different people having different perspectives, and we can agree to disagree, kind of thing. I just think,
definitely.
Thank you for inviting
me. And it's an open discussion and dialogue. And if anybody wants to further engage with Brother Habib, do let me know. We could do it by email as well and things like that. But let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it, and we can invite you back for further discussions, and even perhaps have your book as the talking point, essentially, because I think it's a very important book. But the only one I've read is the one with the orange cover, essentially. And I read that a few years ago, so do forgive me. But I read it a few years ago. It was called Illuminating the Darkness. Yeah, that's the one I've read. North Africans and Africans, right?
Blacks and North Africans.
Blacks and North Africans, you entitled it. Okay, sure. That was the only one I've actually read, and I read it a few years ago, but we'll definitely explore. But thank you very much to everybody coming. But let's call it a day because we are 10 minutes over the time, so it's not too bad. But yeah, thank you again to everybody. Next week is the next session, and it's with the Nation of Islam. The minister, as I said, we're purely inviting him to engage in conversation on a political level, not a theological level, as I said. And that will be on the 4th of November at 7 p.m. So 4th of November, and please look out on Facebook for our marketing regarding that. Thank you very much.
People saw poverty 10 years ago behaving exactly the same way as the elite do.
Exactly the same.
So it's like
and that's what needs to change.
But there's also a set mentality within ourselves.
But I'm not talking about psychology, I'm talking about a class worship. By the way, just for the camera, we changed memory, and I had people in the past accuse me of editing out certain conversations. I have not edited out any conversation. That was a memory change, by the way. And I tried to get it all on camera because I've been accused of certain things.
But I think it's good we're having these different conversations, also got these different perspectives.
Just like to say, right? You want to know what Asians say behind closed doors about black people, right?
I'm
and you can't speak for all Asians.
Not Asians,
please do speak.
what do Africans say about Asian people behind closed
Okay,
doors?
a lot of what Africa, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all Africans
Okay,
or
yeah.
black people, but generally, like say for example, amongst Nigerians, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm generalizing here, but a number of Nigerians might make fun of West Indians, like Caribbeans, because like they're not as academically inclined. That's the perspective as Africans, right? But it's not like a hatred. They might prefer that their sons or daughters marry someone from their same ethnic tribe, but the hatred, I don't really. I don't know. Maybe I can say. I don't
wait,
really
sorry. Whose
hear
hatred are you speaking about?
amongst black people? I don't really.
Amongst black people towards Asians.
To other races, I'm not saying black people are not racist, but I don't know what it is. But so many
it's
races.
not racism. There might be some.
No, there's some black people are racist. They might think they are superior, but
yeah, but I don't think racism.
I mean, okay.
I don't think black people can be racist though.
Coming to my definition, I said earlier. You see, that's why.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? This is why I define.
Oh wait, right, yeah.
You see, because now when we think of racism, we think of
Yeah.
structural racism. And that's why people say things like black people.
Yeah,
can't
but
be
why don't you
racist.
just use the term xenophobia?
Because that is the definition of racism, Oxford Dictionary.
You know, this is
not.
That's it's the
But
yeah.
this is all
you see it.
context. Honestly, it's all context.
Yeah.
It's interesting we're having this conversation. Go to certain places, forget race. We're talking about tribalism.
Yeah.
You come
Yeah.
down, like, this is all structure,
Yeah.
and it's all, like, context that you're speaking
Yeah.
of. So I think that's the danger of, like, generalizing
Yeah.
and getting a broader,
Yeah.
like, attitude towards all of this, because it's very dangerous to do this.
Yeah.
Like, we're speaking about this like that. Go to, for example, probably, you know, Yemen or Somalia, right? You're talking about tribes.
Tribes, yeah.
You're discriminating people. This is ways as the whole racial construct works, depending on which tribe you come from.
Yeah.
So the concept of race doesn't even exist for them.
Yeah.
Like, they could be looking the same, but just
Yeah.
because genealogically you're from the wrong tribe, you're gonna be you know, completely just
Yeah.
alienated in that way.
But the only difference with racism is that because, again, racism in terms of the belief, not structural racism, because you can, if you're judging someone by the way they look, you can't get away with that. The reason why I think, like, if you're black, right, you're always going to be black. What I mean by that, if you're mixed race, or if you're Arab but you know you're politically black and all the rest of it, you can chop and change when it suits you. If you're black, like black African like myself, I can't be nothing but black.
Yeah.
I can go to any, and that's why that's why it's different, because you can have someone that's a strong advocate for black people but very fair in complexion, but they might after I want to just try something else, and they can blend into mainstream society. No matter what I do, I can dye my hair, I can wear different nose piercing, I can wear an earring, I can wear different clothes. I'm still going to be looked at differently because I'm clearly African. That's why that's why I wanted to, again in the beginning, define what I mean by black and not use the political black term, because as much as, yes, I think it's important that non-white people come together, I can't come across as something that I'm something as someone that's I can't come across as being someone that's something that's not of African descent, basically. Whereas basically everyone else that is kind of racially ambiguously looking can.
If you've got rid of the social construct of race, which is like in terms of nations and stuff like that, you still have peoples. So like you have Semitic peoples, you have Caucasians, Indo.
But you wouldn't know where they're from. But okay, an Arab, right?
Okay. An Arab is Semitic.
No, but I'm saying Arab can go to someone like a different part of the world, like Venezuela, for example, and they can possibly can blend in. An African, whether you're from Senegal, no matter where you can be treated a certain way. That's my point. So, and that's why it's no other people have got that apart from black people, or clearly African-looking black people. That's why it's an issue.
Is your concept of race a biological concept then?
My concept of race?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe in the concept.
No,
I don't believe in the concept
of
of
common thread.
No, I don't believe in the concept of race, because as we know, it's a social construct. But I'm just saying that.
Yeah, but
being
isn't
black
whiteness
African,
a social construct? So anything.
No, it is.
No, but you said like an American going to Venezuela.
Okay, what stereotypically? What is that? No, what I mean by stereotypical in Africa, because even how I'm using terms, you can be a North African, like I think. Yeah, and sorry, I'm not using that. Not me using you as an example, but which I am. But you can go to Brazilian, to Brazil, fit in, and she's Brazilian. No question. Where are you from? What's her heritage?
Yeah, but
you can come across as being Spanish, from different parts of the world, even American, and you can blend as she looks. I'm always going to be considered an African. I would, she would, and Ayan would. Even yourself, I don't know where you're from, but just again, I don't. You could be.
My grandmother's Kenyan.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying it in a. I'm just saying that you could pass off as an Arab, you can pass off as an Asian. Do you understand? So you can blend in. So although you might be politically black and advocate for black people, you can.
I don't know if
you can take your foot off the gas if you wanted to. That's just being honest. I couldn't. So that's why it's different for black Africans. Do you understand what I'm getting at? It's a total different, especially like the issue of like black beauty and stuff like that. Because as much as people want to kind of defend it, they can, okay, I want to try something else. Because if you're like a black woman, you're a black woman. Do you understand what I'm getting at? That's why I think other races, I don't think they've really understood.
So is it just based on perception? Because if I look,
It's
Asian,
not
if I look
it's
Arab,
not perception because it's reality.
Because I'm a black, and I'm African as well.
No, you are, but yeah, sorry, it's perception. You're right. So it's perception because I might perceive you to be okay. I don't know where you look Brazilian. How come you're Brazilian? You look. Do you understand what I'm getting at? You could be African. You could, and you can blend in and not have those issues because of the way you look. Whereas if you're black African,
But that's from a black African perspective, not from a Brazilian or an Arab perspective.
what do you mean not from Brazilian?
Like, that's just your perception.
What do you mean not from a Brazilian perspective?
Like a Brazilian. Like,
Okay, in
I've
Brazil.
met Brazilians who clearly see me as an African person.
Okay, in Brazil, the more African you look and darker you are, the more discriminated you are against. I've been to Brazil 5 times. I spent a number of months in Brazil, and that's the reality. So even though a number of Brazilians look like sometimes a complexion, and in Brazil I'll be considered to be black and you'll be considered to be black, you'll be treated, even you can pass off as white, which I didn't go into in terms of understanding blackness. It's not only race, it's hair texture. So the more finer your hair is, the more you can kind of. And I'm not trying to say that you're less black. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that when you're clearly black, you can't escape it. If you look racially ambiguous,
the connection between the perception of blackness, and the treatment, and the class.
Okay, so the treatment. But I would argue
class
that
structures. They're not two separate things. They're actually symptomatic of the same phenomenon.
But I would argue that the treatment of. Well, I think we're going to go into probably another. I hear what you're saying, but I'm just conscious of time. But this has been really enjoyable. I've actually enjoyed it because, again, if I've said anything that has offended anyone, so what? I'm joking. It's important that we have conversations and again, just different people having different perspectives and we can agree to disagree kind of thing. I just think,
definitely.
Thank you for inviting
me. And it's
an
open discussion and dialogue. And if anybody wants to further engage with Brother Habib, do let me know. We could do it by email as well and things like that. But let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it, and we can invite you back for further discussions and even perhaps have your book as the talking point essentially, because I think it's a very important book. But the only one I've read is the one with the orange cover, essentially. And I read that a few years ago, so do forgive me. But I read it a few years ago. It was called Illuminating the Darkness. Yeah, that's the one I've read. North Africans and Africans, right?
Blacks and North Africans.
Blacks and North Africans, you entitled it. Okay, sure. That was the only one I've actually read, and I read it a few years ago. But we'll definitely explore. But thank you very much to everybody coming. But let's call it a day because we are 10 minutes over the time, so it's not too bad. But yeah, thank you again to everybody. Next week is the next session, and it's with the Nation of Islam. The minister, as I said, we're purely inviting him to engage in conversation on a political level, not a theological level, as I said. And that will be on the 4th of November at 7 p.m. So 4th of November, and please look out on Facebook for our marketing regarding that. Thank you very much.